we good? Yeah, because nobody can hear me. I'd like to bring to order this January 2014 meeting of the Northern New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board. I'm Lee Bishop. I'm the Deputy Designated Federal Official for the Advisory Board. I'd like to welcome all the board members and also welcome our public today. It's my pleasure to turn the meeting over to the Chair, Carlos Valdez. Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Lee. Welcome, everybody. This is the Northern New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board, and we're chartered with the cleanup of Cold War and legacy waste for the labs in Los Alamos. So if we can keep the conversations on topic, and we'll move right along. First of all, what I'd like to do is, Dave, if you can give us a little spill on the microphones.
Absolutely. Welcome back, everybody. And just as a refresher, in our attempt to improve the audio quality and cut down any side conversations or paper rustling, all the microphones are set to a push to talk. There's a little blue button on the right-hand side of the microphone. You will want to lean into your microphone and push and hold that button during your comments. When you're done, just simply release the button and the microphone will disengage.
Any questions on that, members? Good. Push to play. At this point, if we can mute our phones, I'd appreciate that. I'd also like to welcome our two student interns, Caitlin and Deidre. Welcome. Thank you for coming today. And thank all of you guys for coming in as well to the full board meeting. I know time is precious, and it's on a volunteer basis, and it's good to see this many board members here today. I really appreciate that. With that, I guess, William, are we good with the quorum? Good. Let's go ahead and get some introductions done. And Bonnie, how about we start with you and we work around the table?
I'm Bonnie Lucas, and I represent Santa Fe, and I am a CAB member.
Good afternoon, everybody. Danny Mayfield with Santa Fe County. I also live in Nambe, New Mexico. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Gerard Martinez, Santa Fe Community College.
Nana Girardi, CAB member from Los Alamos.
Stephen Schmeling, CAB member from Santa Fe.
Angel Quintana, CAB member from Pueblo Poaque.
Joe Tiano, Santa Fe, CAB member.
Manuel Pacheco, CAB member, Ranchos de Taos and Village of Corrales.
Ashley Sanderson, CAB member from Santa Fe.
William Alexander, CAB staff.
Denise Santisteban, Executive Director.
Doug Sayre, Vice Chair from the City of Santa Fe. Thank you. Adrian Chavez, CAB member from Albuquerque.
Brenda Gallegos, CAB member from Santa Cruz.
Allison Major, CAB member from Los Alamos.
Deidre Roybal, student at Poaque Valley High School.
Caitlin Martinez, and student at Los Alamos National Laboratory.
Bob Viriel, and I'm a Los Alamos CAB member.
Good afternoon, Patty Jones with Los Alamos National Lab Environmental Programs.
I'm Allison Dories. I'm the Environmental Protection Division Leader at Los Alamos National Lab.
So, good afternoon. I'm Rick Verhagen. I'm a staff member of the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board. I'm a site representative at Los Alamos.
I'm Jonathan Blowey. I'm the other site representative with the Defense Board at Los Alamos.
Christine Houston. I'm the alternate UDFO.
Good afternoon. I'm Scott Kovac with Nuclear Watch New Mexico.
Welcome, folks in the audience. If you'd like to address the board during public comment period, if I may ask you to sign up with Bridget there in the corner, and we'll have public comment here in a few minutes. In front of you today, folks, the blue sheet of paper is our agenda. And as you know, we're looking at trying something different today. Normally, we start at 1 and go till 7. But today we started with lunch, and we're going to see if we can get out of here by 5. The agenda's pretty packed. There's very interesting information and presentations that we're going to be hearing today. And I'm guessing that we're going to probably get ahead of schedule here for a bit. And then when we get down to the presentations, we'll probably catch up with the agenda. But if anybody has any questions on the agenda, let's go ahead and hear that now. If not, we'll entertain a motion.
I move we approve the agenda.
I second it.
You got a motion and a second to approve the agenda the way it is. Any comment? All in favor of approving the agenda the way it is, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? We have an approved agenda. Next is the approval of minutes for our November 20th meeting. And hopefully everybody has had a chance to take a look at that. We have a motion from Manuel to approve the minutes the way they are.
I second that.
Bonnie seconds. Discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes the way they are, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Let's move on to old business, written reports. Did everybody get a packet? Okay. So we have the yellow, the pink, and the green papers has attachments in your packets. The green one is a report from the chair on the activities that the chair has been involved in since our last meeting in November. The yellow one is the executive director's report, and the pink one is our proposed, and I'm guessing finalized, calendar for 14. Are there any questions on the reports that are contained in your packet? Seeing none, we'll move on to other information on old business. Manuel?
Little point of clarification on the executive director's report, the executive committee, the ad hoc committee, and forgive me, I guess because I've been so busy as of late, but did we conduct, we haven't done the self-evaluation, or is it already completed?
We did the survey for 13, and that has been submitted. That was submitted in December. What I'm guessing, what I'd like to see, with the permission of the ad hoc committee, is those same people serve as a standing ad hoc committee for the survey. And I think Ashley's on that, Alex and Steve, and Manuel?
And myself.
Okay. And what I'm thinking is that it's a tool that it's a live instrument that works, that the ad hoc committee can work throughout the year and look to see what we're doing as a board and any of the information that's contained in the survey, if it's still relevant, or if any of that needs to be changed, or if we need to be focusing on something new. And so that by the time we come to the fall, when we do the survey, when we survey ourselves again, that we have that instrument ready. And so ad hoc committee, I guess I would ask, is it okay that you guys maintain that committee throughout the year? Go ahead, Menes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Manuel. At the last executive committee meeting, the executive committee asked if Alex, who said he would lead the ad hoc committee, and yourself, Ashley and Steve, would continue to review the results of the survey and to come up with any suggestions for improvements based on what the board members, their strong opinions on meeting times, meeting location, whatever the situation is. If there's a theme in that survey, if you could come to the executive committee with any recommendations for improvements to processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Manuel. Any other comments? Suggestions? I guess, Lee.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, as far as the bi-monthly meeting schedule, I think we agreed it would be finalized. However, the next combined committee meeting will be a little bit different. Typically, we have those at the CAB offices there in Pewaukee. We're expecting a little higher than normal attendance to that meeting because of our guest speaker, Mr. Kovac, will be attending that, giving his perspective. So we have moved that meeting to Cities of Gold, and I believe that is February 12th will be that meeting. So that's just a note for everybody that our combined committee meeting, April 12th, will actually be at Cities of Gold. It'll be right there by the restaurant in their small conference area. It's not actually in the casino itself. It's over at the hotel site. I think most of you have been there before if you're on the board. But just a note for, in I guess a couple weeks from now, we'll have that meeting.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Members, if you would look on the yellow sheet, which is my report, at the bottom of that sheet is a listing of important dates. So if you could please make note of those dates, and that's the February 12th meeting that Lee was speaking of, and then, of course, the March meetings, okay, committee and bi-monthly.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to mention to CAB members is on the issue of presentations. A lot of times what happens is we get requests from members to make presentations to the full board or combined committee meetings, and that's good. I really appreciate board members stepping up and offering presentations from qualified experts on whatever subject that it pertains to, the labs. The thing that we need to keep in mind, that I would like you to keep in mind, is that we have to get requests like that at least a month ahead of time, preferably 2 months ahead of time, because the executive committee, whenever we meet, and sometimes it's not just monthly, sometimes we'll have teleconference calls in between executive meetings to talk about presentations, possible presentations. And so if you have a presentation that you would like the full board to hear or to see, that's great. But get it to the executive committee, get it to Manise well ahead of time so that we can get those scheduled well in advance. Okay? I guess with that, I'd like to open up the public comment period and invite anybody from the audience to address the board. If you can please step up to the mic and introduce yourself. And Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the CAB and audience, public, for showing up today, taking time out of your busy days to work on these really complicated things. And I don't know who you're expecting on February 12th there, Lee, but thanks for the larger space. First off, I'd like to say that I wish the CAB would consider having these public comments at the end of the meeting. It's hard for me to, I can give general comments now, other members of the public, but it's, it'd be, I believe the CAB would get more useful comments if the comment period was at the end of the meeting, especially if there's a presentation that we haven't seen or something like that. So I wish the CAB would consider that. I would also believe that state that the cab, I'm thinking the cab, I'm wishing the cab, I'm requesting that the cab do a recommendation for the remedies at Area G. I would like to see the laboratory reconsider remedies for Area G that permanently reduce toxicity, mobility, and volume of contaminants. There's a real, Area G was such a large waste dump and dispose of, and I guess we're gonna hear more about it later today. But it's so segmented. There's this kind of waste. It's pre this waste, after this waste, after 1980 waste, pre 1980 waste. There's RICO waste. There's transuranic waste. There's active low level waste cells. It needs to be looked at as a whole. I mean, it's one area, and to address it, this and that, it just all needs to be recharacterized and put somewhere safe and not poised above our aquifer. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Gerard?
Mr. Chair, I like the idea of if I could extend that idea on the public comment. If we could consider putting public comment in two places, maybe at the beginning and then towards the end, that would satisfy people who are able to come early, maybe need to leave, or those people that can only come later on in the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Gerard. I think we'll go ahead and do that. If nobody has any heartburn, what we'll do is after we're done with Lee Bishop's update, between 4:30 and 4:45, we'll open up public comment period again. It's a good idea. Is that okay with everybody? Yep. And Scott, I think that's an excellent idea about the cab coming up with working on a recommendation for Area G. And what I'd like to do is ask somebody on the cab, or some people on the cab, members of the board, if we could possibly maybe not create an ad hoc committee, but have volunteers to maybe work with Scott on coming up with some kind of a recommendation for Area G. As you know, the public can't make a recommendation, but a board member can. But we really appreciate the public input on these recommendations. And so if we have anybody that would like to work with Scott on coming up with, or maybe the Waste Management Committee. Alex?
Chair, I actually have a draft recommendation I'd like to put before the cab, and I was planning to put it at our microphone, please.
I was planning to bring a draft recommendation to the combined committee meeting, and I actually have a draft that I put together, and I could try to get copies distributed today, or just send it to Denise afterwards and have her distribute it electronically. And if we decide to put together a committee, I would have no problem with that.
Okay, good.
To discuss that recommendation.
Okay. Would that work for you, Scott? If we had a couple of board members to sit with you and work with you on coming up with a recommendation or two?
That's more than I would have thought would happen, but yes, thank you. I would be glad to help sit on any committee working on a resolution like that, a recommendation.
Okay. Okay, we'll plan for that and see what we can get done between here and the next board meeting. Allison?
Hi, Mr. Kovacs, could you come back to the microphone? Thank you. I just want to be clear about what is being requested on the record. What I understood was really an informational or reframing problem, because Area G is rather large with a lot of variety to it. And I hear you wanting something that's a more unified statement or a more singular, unified approach. And whenever I think of any complex problem, like building a house or my son going to college or anything like that, you can't attack it all at once. You have to break it down in order to attack it and solve pieces of it. So I just wanted on the record to be sure that what we were talking about was sort of an informational or reframing issue versus, I don't know, getting 6,000 bulldozers over there at once. You know what I'm saying? The difference? Am I correct in my understanding?
Yes, no, that's, I would not imagine that, it could all be done at once, and it's a very long-term project, maybe decades, maybe. And so, yes, but I think the overall or the final end, needs to be considered, as we go along, and maybe it changes, maybe the methods of cleanup or remedies change as we go along, but we need to keep it on the table and for the future.
Okay, I just want to be sure I understood that the thrust of this proposed recommendation would have to do with being a voice for a comprehensive statement of the approach. The CAB would be advising in this direction versus advising in 6,000 bulldozers all doing it at once.
Right,
The framing of the issue.
Yes.
Because maybe there isn't a comprehensive voice framing the Area G issue.
Right, it's very segmented, and like I say, it's going to be a long-term program, and with the funding levels now, if we were to be able to get twice the funding, if we could get $300 or $400 million a year, then the cleanup would be doable, and over decades,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bonnie?
I was wondering if Scott could speak to a little bit about some of his wording. I want to just be, for clarity's sake, poised above the aquifer. I would like to, maybe if Scott, you could, oh, you're here, you could just describe exactly your understanding of that, and then, of course, if maybe Lee could speak to that just a little, just to refresh all of our memories.
Well, there's the Espanola Basin, which is a sole source aquifer that serves Santa Fe, Los Alamos, and Espanola. So those three communities, which sole source means that more than half the people get their drinking water from that aquifer. And it's this, the proximity of the Santa Fe Buckman well field and the Buckman Buckman direct diversion project to Los Alamos. You can tell that, much of the water comes out of the Rio Grande for the Buckman direct diversion. Some of the water, maybe 20 or 30% of the water that is taken up by the Buckman well field comes from under the laboratory. So, the Area G is, 700 or 900 or 1,000 feet above the aquifer at that point. So it's, okay now, but their contaminants have been released from the bottom of Area G at this point. Thank you.
Steve?
Yes, I guess I would like to be clear. Area G has multiple pieces to it. There's the 3706 campaign for the above-ground waste, which is going on. Then there's a great deal of below-ground waste, which is, quote, retrievable, which I think is the next phase in this project. And then there's all this other waste, which is buried not in a retrievable form. And so we're just barely finishing the 3706 campaign. We're almost done with that. The next big project would be the retrievable underground waste, and that includes the 33 shafts, which are an as yet unsolved problem. And then following that, there is all the other waste. And I guess at this point, I'm not sure that there's enough information, actually, to make a good recommendation for the waste which is not retrievable. Looking at the CME report, it's really not a very comprehensive or detailed report. I don't think it's a convincing argument for any of those remedies. So I think that whatever this comes forth as a recommendation needs to be very clear which waste it's talking about and looking at it in some kind of time frame of when it's likely to take place, because I think it's many years yet in front of us.
Go ahead, Lee.
So I guess this could be maybe phrased a great opening salvo for our next few months of work for the board. This issue has come to light. A lot of that was originally through Mayor Cossa's recommendation and Scott's recommendation he handed out at the last committee meeting. So I encourage you all to go off and learn what you can about Area G. You're going to have a very good presentation today on what the proposed remedy is. That has not been approved by the state yet. And as I've always said, I'm the true waste guy. David Rhodes is in the back of the room today just waiting to get at that mic, but he's not going to come up quite yet because maybe after the presentation.
Public comment before?
If you want to participate in a public comment, you can. But this is what we want. This is a great opportunity to get the board's perspective. Hopefully the expectation is consensus. If there is a change from the recommended remedy, we want a consensus recommendation. Certainly if we don't have that, we'll work with that as well. But, I appreciate Bonnie's invitation for me to speak to it, but it's way too complex to answer in just a moment. And Mr. Smelling is exactly correct, there's a lot of information you need to understand before you can just very quickly come to a one-stop solution. So I encourage everybody to listen, ask a lot of questions, and develop your own opinion, and then let's come to a consensus.
And one of the things I hope we hear today from DOE or the labs is that as we wind down on the 3706 campaign, what's next? And so framework agreements seem to work really well, and they're popular with the public, they're popular with NMED, and so how do we bridge from 3706 into what the next framework agreement should be? And Lee and I have talked about that a little bit, and so that's the logical next step in the process. And so within the next few months, that's the direction we're probably going to be going in. Dave, you want to go ahead and speak to the board?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the board. David Rhodes, Los Alamos Field Office, Supervisor for the Environmental Remediation Work, everything other than the TRUE program. Mr. Majori will be here presenting a lot of information on what our plan is for Area G. Do want to just set a short context. The discussions that we're having with you, presenting the information, are so that we can initiate public discussions, but we are going to be waiting for the New Mexico Environment Department, Hazardous Waste Bureau to go and make a decision before any decisions are made. And that's where the input from this body would likely end up interjecting your opinions and recommendations into the public discussions that NMED would initiate. We have not had a chance to sit down across the table with Mr. Kovac, but we certainly look forward to it, and with the members of the board. But likely the discussions will get technical today, and we'll have additional technical discussions when we meet next and Mr. Kovac does his presentation. My only request would be that we might not circulate a recommendation to members of the board in advance of those two discussions, and that we hold it until those discussions are had and we can answer your questions. That's my comments.
Thank you. Bonnie?
I just wanted to, when I had asked that question about poised above the aquifer, I know Leah's been so wonderful in giving us so much information. Since this is viewed by the public on public TV, I thought we should just maybe spur a little comment about that so it wasn't magnified into something, else. So it's perfect that this is coming up.
The current technical understanding of the performance of the Area G landfill it's been operated, you'll see, for many decades, is there's a function there called transevaporation that actually we have more liquid and vapor flowing up from the groundwater and evaporating off the surface of that mesa top than ever goes down into that mesa top. I'm not a hydrogeologist, but that's the general theory at hand. And one of the discussions as to why those pits and trenches don't need to be lined is it actually interfere with that transfer of moisture from the aquifer out through the mesa top, is my understanding at this time. And then the solution that we'll talk about today would create a barrier that would keep any infiltration from coming into that waste, therefore interrupting the transport mechanism that would carry it to the aquifer. And unfortunately, I'm not really aware of any landfill in the country that is not over an aquifer.
Alex?
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to add some clarification about the recommendation that I'm referring to and apparently Mr. Kovacs was referring to. That recommendation came verbatim from the comments from NMED on Lionel's corrective measures evaluation. And let me read it for you, verbatim from NMED's comments. Lionel should give preference to the remedies that must more completely and permanently reduce the toxicity, mobility, and volume of contaminants as is consistent with the provisions of the NMED consent order on compliance entered into March 2005 by the New Mexico Environment Department, Department of Energy, and the University of California, with Los Alamos National Security, LLC, as successor. So basically, it's borrowed directly from NMED's review of the CME, in which they found that the CME was not adequate enough in doing that, in giving preference to those remedies that reduce toxicity, mobility, and volume of contaminants. And I believe that's where Mr. Kovacs' comments were going. That was actually a recommendation that was introduced by Mayor Koss of the City of Albuquerque to the Regional Coalition of Llano Communities at this month's monthly meeting in Taos, I believe. And so I believe it's before the RCLC right now, and a very similar recommendation forms the basis of my overall recommendation.
Okay, I think it's a very good subject topic, but I think before we can have any discussion about that as a full board, we probably need something in front of us to look at. And so I'm not sure if that, I mean, I don't think that's going to happen today, but maybe we can have something available by our next meeting, if possible. Nana?
It seems like there are two potential sources or methods of possible contamination of water from Area G, one being runoff, particularly in the case of storms where the water might run downhill essentially as surface water towards the Buckman diversion, and the other into what I sort of understood as the aquifer, but going into groundwater, which I think, Lee, is what you said doesn't happen because there's more transevaporation. Are those two separate routes that we have to consider? And is there protection for both of those in any of the plans we come up with?
I'll defer to Mr. Rhodes since he's with us today. It's his project, and he gets kind of mad at me when I talk about his project.
No, that's quite all right. Questions are valid. There are two distinct paths for it. Right now, stormwater is considered separately from the consent order. There is a very slight overlap when we're talking about cleaning up solid waste management units in terms of certificates of completion on the state side versus the stormwater controls on the EPA side. However, the Area G, all of the solid waste management units at Area G are currently covered by an operational cap that was installed and compacted in order to go and protect it from the radiological constituents getting to the environment. There has been no degradation of that cap, and in a lot of cases, the dirt cover, the compacted dirt cover, has been replaced or covered with asphalt and additional protection to it. There is no current access of stormwater to the radiological and hazardous constituents that are contained in Area G. So right now, we are not seeing anything in the stormwater output that is attributed to the waste that we have there. It is things like atmospheric deposition of PCBs, gross alpha from nuclear fallout. Those are the types of levels that we currently see all over the laboratory, and that's what we're seeing in stormwater. So the waste that we have is not being exposed to that particular pathway. For the groundwater on the other side, I'm sure Mr. Majori will be speaking about this, but Scott was right. We are approximately 800 feet above the water table, and it is on a raised rock mesa that happens to breathe not just sideways out the sides of the mesas, but also breathes up and down. And right now, we do not have any evidence other than very shallow is relative, and I'm sure there would be disagreements on how shallow is shallow, but we are hundreds of feet above the water table with whatever contaminant vapor plumes we have, and those vapor plumes we feel are relatively stable. The risk is up to interpretation. We use the numerical methods that the EPA allows and the state allows by their processes, but those will be some of the things we'll bring to you in the technical discussions. Did I kind of get to your question?
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Danny?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And along the doctor's question, just the pathway for the trans-evaporation pathway that we discussed, that's kind of new to me, and I didn't know that was happening out there. And with that, what mitigates that risk? Or is it something that we really need to be concerned with?
As we silence the cell phones. That's all right. Transevaporation is really speaking to moisture coming from the water table up. So really what we look at, and it's been explained to me, I'm not a hydrogeologist, is that you literally get into the point where you have negative rainfall up there. You have more moisture coming out of the ground than you actually have via precipitation entering the ground. So it's a negative water loss as it goes across that mesa top. Remember, we are on the backside of the caldera, which is an ancient volcano, and which formed these mesa tops. So there's a lot of water and groundwater generated up in the mountains there that's coming down and going to the Rio. So you actually have a negative precipitation function on that mesa top because it is so dry and you have evaporation off that rock surface. And David, if you want to add to that, if I'm not getting it exactly correct.
You're exactly right.
Does that help, Danny? Hello.
Carlos?
Doug?
Members of the committee, it seems to me, excuse me, I'm on the wrong button. Members of the committee, it seems to me we're on a basis that we're all concerned about this at this point, about how and this is going to take place. And based on what Alex is talking about, it seems to me the next committee meeting that we're going to have, that we should have on the agenda something about consideration of formulation of some kind of framework agreement, I guess, and recommendations from this board about how we want to approach that. And I just thought maybe we could look at that because all of us are concerned how this is going to develop. And I think it's very, very important to us. So I thought if we could look at that at this next time, because we're going to have some background today about what's going on. Scott's going to give us a presentation on some of their views at the next meeting. And then we could start looking at how we want to try to approach this as far as the board on a I guess, consideration of a step basis or a framework agreement on how we might look into this. Because it certainly, as Allison said, it's going to take some consideration about how it's done, and then it's not going to be a short-term program. It's going to be a very long-term program. This is the way I look at it. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Steve?
This is just a follow-up to Nona's question. We just had a huge rainstorm up at Los Alamos, and I wondered if any measurements were done or there's any impact visible on Area G as a result of that rain, which is like a 100-year rainfall.
The rain event actually, and I believe it was almost a 1,000-year rain event in some of those canyons that we had, 10, 20 feet of water blowing through those canyons. We actually had some people kind of marooned for a little while as that storm event did occur. As far as Area G, we had no damage to the above-ground facilities, and we have no known impact to below-ground disposal pits because of the cover that we had put on there and compacted. You'll get some minor erosion, but there was no known releases from Area G or significant damage of any kind during those storm events.
There was some additional data taken. During the storm events, we had wash-off type things from the storm. We have the groundwater monitoring program that actually monitors the vapor plume that's below the facilities and then the water table, which we do sample around Area G. We do not have current data post-storm. I think there's been one vapor sampling campaign and 2 groundwater campaigns that have not shown any change in the vapor plumes that are relatively shallow surface and the groundwater in the area below the Area G. So right now we don't. There will likely be another sampling campaign coming up in February, and there will likely be more data about 45 days after that when it hits, and tell us if you're interested. But right now we have not seen impacts on the 2 or 3 sampling campaigns we've had.
Gerard?
Mr. Chair, if I can tag on to questions by Commissioner Mayfield in question, the transevaporation, can any contaminants or like reverse leaching attach onto that type of moisture into the atmosphere?
Not that I'm aware of. It's not a, the issue about transevaporation is it creates a negative effect, so you don't have, contaminants going into the groundwater itself. Is the belief in applying that, let's say, theory for this discussion, that's what is actually happening, how that mesa top is performing. So you have water vapor coming out, remembering that the waste in Area G was a solid waste management unit. There may be trace liquids in there and some of the waste from earlier disposals, but it's, for the most part, or as far as I'm aware, it's almost all solid waste, so you don't have liquid per se. We do have this one vapor issue that we have detected that we're monitoring and trying to understand the full nature and extent of that, but it is it's a dry active, so you don't get a reverse pathway per se. It just stops a pathway of rainwater leaching through the waste, going down and taking it into the aquifer.
Last question, Bob.
I believe we're going to have to take a look at this being able to do much with TA-50. We've got a recommendation for the 33 shafts 2 or 3 years ago, and it was submitted to the CAB, and we came into a situation where we say, well, the 33 shafts are underground storage area, but we're looking only at above ground. I don't know if that's changed or not. And we never did get a complete response to that recommendation, so it's still hanging there.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
So it might have been, I don't think it was even 18 months ago, Bob, for TA-54, and the recommendation was to look at the alternatives for the 33 shafts And the department did respond back with a recommendation that we were going to conduct an environmental assessment of the 33 shafts and explore the reasonable alternatives associated with the 33 shafts, including but not limited to leaving them in place. But that was our commitment. You watch the papers like I do. You know our funding's been limited, and 3706 has been our priority the last 18 months. And you saw the budget numbers, and so I think there's probably some room in there, and that would be a great question this afternoon for Mr. Majari, if we can proceed forward with that EA in the near term, or what that schedule might be. I think you would be a great person to ask, Mr. Majari.
Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to address the board? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public comment period. Alex? Press the button.
To me, so I just want to make one more comment. There's been a lot of specific questions coming up with regards to groundwater contamination and the migration of contaminants. The comment brought forward by Mr. Kovacs and the comments made by NMED are not based on current contamination of groundwater or soil or anything else. Basically, they were requirements of the consent order, and it was a philosophical approach on how these sites will be attacked, how they'll be evaluated, and how they'll be rated. And so NMED's comments with regards to the reduction in volume and mobility, mobility, and toxicity of contaminants was mandated by the consent order itself. So we need to look at a little bit more than is groundwater contaminated right now. Area G has only been in existence for about 65 years, 70 years. We're talking about a remedial action that's going to be approved for the next 1,000 years or so. So I don't think we can look at what's happening right now, especially with regards to NMED's comments. I think NMED encouraged that Llano rate all its alternatives with these things in consideration. I think the issue before us is not just will it contaminate. We don't have enough information to make that decision right now, but do we support NMED's the position that NMED put forth in the consent order of 2005, that these things be major factors in the consideration of any alternative put forward by Llano. And so I think it's a little bit of a mix. Not only is contamination occurring, but what did the consent order require, and is Llano doing that?
And that's the point, Alex, and I think that's why we're here today as a board, is to serve as a liaison between NMED and the labs and come up with what we think are good suggestions, good recommendations on how they should move forward on CMEs, on remedies, on cleanup issues. And so let's see what kind of recommendations as a board we can come up with to help both sides. Yeah. Let's move on to new business, and I think we're well on track with that already. We've already gone over the meeting schedule for 2014, and as you see, our next meeting will be at Sandia Casino in Albuquerque. And I guess depending on how this time frame works for this meeting, we'll make decisions on whether to move it back to 1 to 7 or keep it from noon to 5, but I guess this will be our test run on that time frame. Other issues on new business, at least what I have, is in case anybody has not heard, our federal representative out of D.C., Kate Alexander, is getting ready to retire next month. She's been very, very helpful to this board and to all the other site-specific boards across the country. So it's going to be sad to see her go and interesting to see who they bring in to replace Kate. We have sent a letter already, right? It's already.
Mr. Chair, we have a certificate of appreciation from this board with a letter from you thanking her and wishing her well in her retirement. So that is here for your signature today, if anyone wants to see it. And I'll send the letter out to the board.
Okay, thanks. And those of you that have met Kate, you know that she's a wonderful lady, and you know, if you feel like you want to send her an email thanking her, wishing her well, please do so. The other issue that I had wanted to talk about is upcoming travel. Let's see, Angel and Irene will be attending the
Mr. Chairman, it's the Environmental Justice Conference at Howard University in Washington, D.C. That's the last week in March. And then you and, oh my God, Alex, are going to be attending the Waste Management Symposia in Phoenix the end of this month. No, end of February.
the beginning of March. And that's all the new business I had, and I'm kind of hoping that when Lee talks about the update that he has some budget news for us. Go ahead. Oh, okay.
Regarding travel, we have a lot of Santa Fe residents and Taos residents and folks in the area. For the meeting at Sandia, you're under government travel requirements. So if you're required to travel more than 50 miles from your place of residence, we are obligated to offer you lodging for the night. So consider that. You know, the Sandia facility is a nice facility. If you want to take advantage of that, and you know, when you're deciding whether you want to have a 5 o'clock adjournment or a 7 o'clock adjournment, you know, I'd encourage you to be safe. You know, if you're tired, don't drive. Take advantage of the opportunity for the lodging. This will be our first time at Sandia for a meeting, so we'll be looking for feedback on that. But you know, don't hesitate to work with Bridget and Manise on arranging lodging there at the resort for the evening. I'd encourage you to do that and be safe.
The other last piece of information I have is that sometime in the fall, Manise, and hopefully with the help of the executive committee, we'll be working on a public forum, and the topic of that public forum is going to be Area G. So if there's any information that you would like to see in that public forum on Area G, please submit that information to Manise. I don't think we've set dates on that yet, but we're looking at sometime in the fall. Does anybody have any new business that they would like to share with the board? No? Is Tony available? Tony's here, okay. So let's go ahead and move on to our upcoming hearings, permits, and public comment periods. Go ahead, Tony.
Mr. Chair, members of the CAB, thank you for the time. Does everybody have a copy of the handouts, Manise? Great, thank you. So you may recall back last fall, I was asked to provide periodic updates to the board on upcoming permit activity. That spans hazardous waste, water, surface water, a few other activities. So I don't know if I'll take 30 minutes or so today. If you look at the single blue slide, you'll see the list of everything that's coming up right now. Oh, you actually do have slides. Excellent. I didn't know where it would be projected. Yeah. Now I have to see if I can see my notes. So the first item up there is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. Oh, thank you. NPDS permit. That's when you say NPDS, that's the permit that everybody thinks we're discussing. That currently covers 11 outfalls at the laboratory, and we talked a little bit about that when I was at the CAB meeting in Taos back in, I think that was September or October. That permit is essentially written by EPA, that's my understanding. It's awaiting review and or signature. We expect to see that literally any day. Could be next week, could be a month out. I don't really know. Typically, those permits come with a 30-day compliance schedule on them, so we'll have about 30 days to get that implemented. I don't know exactly what's in that permit, so I can't tell you if there are any terms or conditions in there that we would have difficulty with getting implemented at all or in some particular period of time, but it's on its way. The second permit on there we also discussed in Taos. That's the groundwater discharge permit for the RLWTF. The public comment period on that particular permit closed last month, December. NMED has received comments, and they are in the process of resolving those comments. In terms of schedule, it's not clear to me what we will see and when we will see it, but I suspect we'll see some activity in the next couple of months, most likely. And that permit applies only to the RLWTF. So we have the groundwater discharge permit, DP 857, sanitary waste permit. That's we talked in Taos as well. That covers our sanitary waste system, so it's essentially the sewage plant. It also includes septic tanks, and early in that process, NMED elected to include the SURF facility. Initially, SURF was proceeding on a separate permitting activity, but they rolled them all together. The SURF is the sanitary effluent recycling facility. All of the water that goes through our sanitary plant right now is piped up to the SURF, and that water is cleaned up and polished and reused in our cooling towers. We're reusing right now a significant fraction of our wastewater. We have some critical facilities, computing facilities, SEC for instance right now, 100% of the cooling water used in that facility is coming through that SURF, so it's recycled wastewater. We hope to get that plant, get the efficiency up of that and increase the percentage of water that we are reusing. Where we once got 1 or 2 cycles of water through the plants, that water is so clean we're getting 3 and 4 cycles typically out of those cooling towers now. So we're really pleased with that, and we're going to look at what we can do with that in the future. That public comment will come out sometime in 2014. I don't know what that permit looks like, but it's probably a much lower priority than some of the other permits that are currently in play. One of the things I picked up this year is the Clean Air Act, Title V. We submitted that application in August of 2013 to NMED. I actually said they'll publish a draft up there by February, but actually they have to have the permit out. So they will have a draft out for public comment sometime prior to that. That covers things like the asphalt batch plant, for instance, some of the larger sources. We have a batch plant like the highway department has. Ours doesn't run very often. It's very small, but we do have a permit for it. The TA-63 transuranic waste facility permit, we discussed that a little bit in Taos, and then I think you heard from Mark Hagenstad when we were in Espanola back in, I think it was December. And at that time, that permit was still in play and in review. NMED issued that permit in December, and we'll start moving forward with the implementation of that permit. There are issues that have to be resolved. There are activities in there, engineering design types of things, vapor monitoring, those types of activities. The open detonation is currently under review by NMED, so there's no activity on that right now. Those permits were submitted 18 months ago, I think it was now, almost 2 years. Same for the open burning for 388. What is in play related to some of those things are the closure plans. NMED had the public comment period for 16/3/99. That's going to be a closure. That ended on December 19th as well. I know they have comments. I haven't seen them yet. I've been out of the RCRA world until just this week again, so I'll see what those look like, and we might want to talk about them at some future thing. And then we have the other closure plans for a variety of sites, including potentially some of the stuff at TA-54 that Jeff and everybody will be talking about later. But I don't know what those look like yet. NMED will issue drafts for public comment in the future. I don't know if that's a month out or a year out. I suspect they're having resource issues like a lot of people, and they're going to prioritize these. So I'm not sure what, I would like a little feedback from all of you. I was asked to provide updates on current permitting activity, and what I would like to know from you is this sort of hitting the mark? We're not going to have detailed technical debates. Any one of these could be mini meetings, But if there's something you would like me to address in future rollouts of these updates, I'd be happy to do that. Mr. Puglisi.
Tony, what permits are the open detonation and the open burn units going through? Is it just air, or is it groundwater, or, well, one's closed, right?
There's closers, units we're going to close, and there are units we are intending to permit. So of those that we intend to permit, we've applied for a hazardous waste facility permit, a RCRA permit. And those are an open burning unit and 2 open det units, I believe, and those are the numbers up there. Those will be under RCRA. The air portion of those particular operations, NMED Air Quality Bureau several years ago elected to move the air permitting piece of that into the RCRA permit and process, so it's all in one place. I assume that's still going to happen. It's the way, it looks like that's still true. The closures are for open burning and open det units that we no longer intend to use, and we'll have to figure out what those closures look like.
So that relates to one of the things I would like to see in your presentation. Can you specify the permits, the issues, and the areas that are impacted, including water sources, guiding these actions, and the types of leaks or contaminants we may be referring to?
I think we can do that. I think what we would like to do, if we want to have that discussion, we probably want to limit how much is on the list or have a larger meeting, but I think we can address some of that anyway. If you could flip the slide to the next one, there's only 2 slides in this talk today. I believe it was Scott Kovacs who had requested that we provide a map at the last time we talked about permitted units. So we put these on here, and it doesn't have everything at the laboratory, but it does have the things that we're talking about today. So you can get a general feel for where these units reside in relationship to the rest of the community and the county at large. So you've got the town site, Los Alamos, on the top of that map, and you've got Bandelier on the south end, just to bracket it for you. And you can see the open burn site, Alex, that we were just talking about is at TA-16. That's the one on the left. And then we have 2 open det sites, the OD labels, one at TA-36 and one at TA-39. I did not tag the closure units. There's an open burn site at TA-16 that will be closed. There's an open det, combined open det, open burn facility at TA-14 that might get closed. And one of the 2 sites down at TA-39, one's going to be permitted, and we intend to permit one and close the other. So we're consolidating these activities as well. By and large, the contaminant of concern there, of course, is HE on the surface. Some of these are pretty old facilities. The transuranic waste facility, the TWIF that we had talked about, is pretty much dead center there at TA-63, which is immediately adjacent to TA-50. You see the RLWTF tag. And then SURF, we talked about the recycling facility. That's up at TA-3. And you see the tag for the SWISH, the sanitary plant, is off to the east, southeast. All of the effluent from that plant, we have a discharge, a permitted discharge to TA-46, but we do not discharge to that canyon at all. We pipe all of that water back up to the surf. So we recycle the water, we use as much of it as we can, and whatever remains gets discharged through the same discharge as the power plant, so it gets combined. All of the discharge limits, all of the standards still apply there, whether it's in that canyon or the other canyon. So I don't know if you have any other questions. Is Scott still here? Oh, there you are. Since you were the one that asked for the map, I was wondering if this helps you understand the placement of these facilities.
Thank you. I don't remember asking for the map, but thank you very much. What is the Swiss again? SWW?
Sanitary wastewater system.
Oh, there it is, I see. I did have a question. Mm-hmm. Is the TA-63 transuranic waste facility permit, is that online, the final permit? Is that available?
I think it is on the UNM page. I haven't looked for it yet myself.
Okay. And do you know if it changed much from the draft that we all saw in June? Whatever that was.
I don't, and in defense, today is literally my first official day back in RCRA world.
Welcome.
But in a couple days, I'll be able to answer that.
Okay.
I had a question.
Yes, sir.
I would support what Alex said about what you present, but to me, it would at least be helpful if you could say something about the environmental impact of what these permits are helping with or changing from prior status, or, what the issue is for each of those permits, whether it's you're going to improve discharges to the surface water, or it's going to stay the same, or it's, whatever.
Okay. So to speak a little bit to that right now, the NPDES permit, which was the first one on the list that we talked about, the new permit, we know from earlier drafts that we saw, is going to be more restrictive than the current permit, which is actually quite restrictive. And we have effluent limits for each of the outfalls. Cooling towers tend to be regulated approximately the same, but things like RLW, swish, they have additional parameters, metals, radionuclides, whatever they might be in there. And the water that's coming out of those units right now is, compared to past operations, is much cleaner. We could probably quantify that at some time, but we are also discharging much less water than we used to, by many millions of gallons. Our processes have become more efficient. So we have cleaner water, we're discharging less water, and we're discharging to fewer locations or fewer drainages than we have in the past.
Tony, I think Nana has a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, somewhat similar question to Alex and Steve, but as each of these permits and any new ones come up, if we could hear about what the changes are from the status quo and what problems those are designed to solve or address, so that we can know what these are about, and and how well the current system has been working, and what new improvements or changes are being anticipated.
Okay. An example of that, the TWIF, the Transuranic Waste Facility, that's a new facility located near the point of origin for the waste, so we won't be transporting that waste as far as we have in the past. That's going to be the only new-gen true waste facility on the laboratory, and it's going to replace many of the operations that currently happen at Area G. As that legacy waste goes out and that facility is built, all the new-gen true waste will be managed at the TWIF facility.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, in terms of what's on this report, because this is a regular brief report, and we could really get into a lot of detail on each of the items.
Yes.
For me, what would be helpful each time we get it is simply to kind of have a check off on each of these permits on whether it represents a renewal with substantial changes or just sort of a renewal, life is the same as it was before. Knowing that would give me the information I need to drill down and ask questions, because every 2 months, we're kind of drilling down on different areas, and we tend to zero in on the permits that are related to those areas. I think that would help the time management, just sort of a check off on whether it's a continuation of something or a new invention, and if it's major or minor changes. And then for those permits that have been approved, I'm very interested in, really briefly, what the next steps are when you say you're going to implement the permit, what that actually means.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Tony, I'd be interested in some of these outlying areas, like way towards White Rock and in there. If you could give us some status of, what kind of permit you have at those facilities, whether it's a liquid waste permit or is there a separation of permit from the radioactive waste? I'm sure there is, of how you're separating the waste. And then is there any groundwater monitoring taking place in those areas that you can advise us on?
So there are 2 wastewater systems. There's a rad liquid waste treatment system, and the RLWTF is the plant where we treat that water. That is a separate industrial sewer and collection system, and some of it comes in by truck.
Okay.
That's completely separate from the swish, which is sanitary, so sinks, showers, bathrooms, the kinds of things you would expect to be in a sewage system. I can't speak to the groundwater program other than that there is a rigorous groundwater monitoring program at the laboratory. And they have a lot of wells, they do a lot of sampling, there's a lot of data analysis. I'm not the guy to speak to that, but there are people who can.
Well, I was interested to say, you know, obviously, I was wondering if you truck it, if you're trucking some of the sanitary waste to the plant, how you handle that, and so on. And, you know, what is the volume of the waste that you're having to deal with somewhat? Just to kind of categorize those areas for us so we understand what you're you know, having to do with at those particular facilities.
So the sanitary system is relatively easy. There's about 10,000 people at the laboratory, and we have, I think, 14 septic tanks for some of the outlying areas that aren't connected to the system via pipe. Gallons-wise, it's probably a couple million gallons a day, depending on how busy we are. RLW is a much smaller system. It only collects from certain facilities that generate low-level waste and some true wastewater. Mostly right in the TA3 area and a little bit on the Power Rideau corridor. It's not nearly so widespread.
Thank you.
Lee?
Yeah, so Tony, I appreciate your time. The kind of the intent of this was, and maybe we need to scope it a little bit better, is that we wanted to take a kind of a commercial break in our CAB meeting to let all our CAB members know about all the permit changes happening at the laboratory. Our mission is EM mission. So to the extent practical, a lot of these permits are mission focused, but we wanted to give you kind of this commercial break with Tony so that, you know, certainly you as members, you care a lot about the community, you care a lot about what's happening at the laboratory. This is an opportunity to give you a heads up of when public meetings were occurring, when public comment periods were occurring, even outside of EM scope, environmental management scope, to give you an opportunity to participate as individuals in the public in these processes when the comment periods are going through. So I'll work with Tony in the future to clarify, here are general changes happening in the permitting world up at Los Alamos, and here are permits that could affect the EM cleanups to help you kind of zero in on what we want to discuss at the board a little bit better.
Very good.
Jordan?
Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Bishop, Tony, is it possible for a group of CAB members to do a site visit to an open detonation, open burn? If not, can a video be provided, just so we get a lot more clarification? And just to see this, and I think it would help some of us kind of visualize this whole thing, see the type of terrain, see any of the drainage areas, those type of aspects.
We did produce some videos during the permit application phase. I don't see any reason why we couldn't resurrect those. They're relatively recent. They show exactly what it is we're trying to permit at the burn ground. I don't think we have any videos of open det, but I'll check. But I know for a fact we have one for open burn. In terms of a tour, I guess I won't say it's impossible. It might be difficult, particularly for large groups. It's in a secure area of the lab, but I'll ask. We'll see where we land.
Yeah, my challenge is I'm an EM employee, so that's an open mission issue. So I want to make this information available to you so you as citizens and concerned citizens can pursue that, but it's really outside the purview of this board because it's ongoing mission. So I would like to. I'll talk to my management about it, but it's I don't know where a EM recommendation would be generated from, is my challenge, to be quite honest.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Bishop, and I respect that. It just seems that there's a lot of questions coming up about that and some of the concerns maybe, and knowing that it's an ongoing mission, but maybe there is some connection to what our role is here.
Thanks, Gerard. Bonnie?
I'd just like to thank Tony for compiling this because I think it's a lot of complicated information and wide scope, and I think, you know, for all of us, we're all so busy and we have our own lives, but it would behoove us all to just, even if we can Google things in any way that we can, to try to, because it's a lot to take in at one meeting, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alex?
Yes, I would actually like what you were referring to, where there is an interaction between an active unit and an environmental restoration unit or an EM unit. I would definitely like to hear more with regards to anything that happens with regards to those active units. So I'm not familiar anymore with some of the sites, whether there's like sites below your outfalls that are actually could possibly be impacted by your discharges from those outfalls. Are there still EM sites that would be impacted by active discharges?
There are some EM sites downstream of some of the outfalls. They're pretty far. Most of the flows don't go anywhere near that far. I think 4 of the outfalls aren't actually discharging out the pipe right now. That water is either being diverted or captured for other reasons. So it's really mostly just the cooling towers going out of TA3 and a couple of other outlier sites.
So especially with reference to those sites, I'd like to hear anything that that Tony's group, I guess, handles with regards to those sites. And I also appreciate your presentation. I was unable to hear it in Taos, but also want to congratulate you. My understanding is you're down to 18 outfalls, is that right?
11.
11 from 132.
141.
141. That's pretty good.
But thank you.
Cool. Any more questions for Tony?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tony. I noticed that we didn't fit a break into the agenda here today, but if nobody minds, it's 20 after now. Before we get to Pete's presentation, if we could just take a quick 10-minute break. Next on the agenda, we have a presentation by Pete and Jeff on MDAG, post-true waste retrieval, proposed remedy, a path to long-term stewardship. Gentlemen, are you ready? Okay, with that, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're happy to be here today. Pete and I are going to tag team this presentation today that we're really talking about providing an overview, kind of current status of where we are on the MDAG cleanup. So there's a couple things before I jump into the presentation I want to talk about. First of all, we gave a briefing to the CAB last May. I believe Dave McEnroy did this, which was an update on TA54 monitoring. So we went through all of the monitoring wells, the poor gas wells, the groundwater monitoring and everything like that. And so a little bit what I'm going to cover, because the way we did the site investigation, we continue to use those groundwater wells and things like that for monitoring. So some of the things that you're going to see today ties into what Dave talked in that presentation. But there was one point that was made in that presentation last year, and I'm going to really start and just underline that, which is the same this year. But we have no evidence that the groundwater beneath TA54 is contaminated either radiologically or chemically from MDAG or MDAL or MDAH, all of which make up technical area 54. So that same statement is true today. That's what we said about it a little less than a year ago. But I'll reference back. I know this presentation's in your library. The second thing I want to talk about. So I'm going to talk a lot today about what I know and what I understand. But we do have a CME report, Revision 3, that's in with the state of New Mexico. That presents really the investigation and the corrective measures evaluation and the recommendation, at least that we provided to the state of New Mexico. That is a publicly available document. So if I say something today that seems to contradict that, I will just say that's what is written in that CME report is correct, and probably what I've said is incorrect. So I just want to make sure there was a lot of work and technology, a lot of activity investigation results and everything like that that went into that comprehensive report, and it is available for anybody to take a look at. So what I'd like to cover today is I'd like to go just over a little bit of background about the waste and the history of Area G, the disposal site. I'd like to talk about how we characterized not just the waste, but the site itself. And then Pete's going to talk about the regulatory process or processes for the remediation and the closure of the site. We'll talk a little bit about the path forward, and then we'll just kind of summarize and close, and then open it up to questions from the cab. So MDAG is a disposal site that was opened for solid radioactively contaminated waste in 1957. So it's been there a long time. It's composed of 63 acres of land. If you look at the area layout of where the waste has been disposed of, it's shown on the map here. The photograph is looking really to the west from the east end of Area G. You see our transuranic waste above ground storage and processing areas in those 4 domes. But as you kind of look up the mesa from that, and I'll show you in a map in just a minute, you've got many pits and trenches that were dug and used for the disposal of the waste since it was placed into operation in 1957. We really have three types of disposal mechanisms that were used subsurface. Those are the pits. So we'd build a big pit, and I'll cover that in just a minute. Shafts, which were shafts that were basically drilled or bored into the ground, anywhere from 2 feet in diameter to 16 feet in diameter. And then trenches that were basically trenched, and we had transuranic waste placed into them, and that's one of the actions that we have under the below-grade remediation work that we're doing on transuranic waste today. The last thing I'd just like to note here is we're continuing to dispose of low-level waste in Area G today. We've got one pit, Pit 39, that's used for disposal. For the most part, the volume going into that is very low because the waste management function at the laboratory is really focused on getting that waste shipped off-site to the Nevada test site. We're a certified disposer to the Nevada test site, and so the majority of our low-level waste today is being packaged up and shipped to Nevada for disposal at the DOE facility outside of Las Vegas at the test site. This is a map, so I promised to show you kind of the layout subsurface at Area G, and you can see the pits and the trenches that comprise the area below there. The numbers that you can see but can't really quite clearly make out, that just shows where all the shafts are. And so kind of on this and using different colors, we've tried to show several things here. The green is really the low-level waste that's been placed into the pits and trenches. And I'm going to go through a chronology over time that kind of describes this a little further. But this really just provides a little bit of a flavor. You can see the red or the brown is RCRA regulated units that we have in place. So that'll be part of the closure process. And I'll talk about the VOCs that kind of make up the reason why that is as we go forward. So if I, again, kind of keep that map a little bit in mind, but here's what it's made up of. There's 312 disposal areas or pits, trench, or shaft within that whole area. There's 35 disposal pits, And then we had 2 pits that were also used for below-grade storage of transuranic waste. And those 2 pits are on our cleanup plan that are encompassed in the framework agreement for retrieval and processing of that transuranic waste. The description below just provides a kind of a listing of the things that make up that waste. In the world of shafts, 229 disposal shafts for basically low-level types of waste, and then 44 additional shafts that were used for the below-grade storage of transuranic waste. So that includes what we've talked about before with the 33 shafts. We also have 4 trenches, which I mentioned previously, that were used for the below-grade storage of transuranic waste. Again, within the framework agreement, that's one of the commitments that we're going to excavate and process that waste. And then you can see the range of depth of the waste, and the shafts are the ones that really go down to the, in some cases, down to 65 feet. If I look at a compilation of if we look at a compilation of what's been disposed since 1957, and this is really up until today, but you can see nearly 300,000 cubic meters of waste has been disposed at Area G since the opening of the facility. The inventory, now this is I'm going to show you a graph a little bit different, but if I just add up the curies that were disposed and don't do any half-life degradation of the nuclides, 3.87 million curies, and roughly 10,000 PE curies, which are plutonium equivalent curies, which are really kind of our benchmark measure of the transuranic content. And then within retrievably stored, this is the waste that we're committed to under the framework agreement to get out. You can see that volume significantly less, but the PE curies, plutonium equivalent curies, are quite a bit more associated with that transuranic waste. So that gives you an idea of the volume and the activity that's disposed at Area G today. This is a chart, and I think this is, again, this is where I talked about the 3.8 million. If you look on the left side, that's the total activity in curies. That's because since 57, there's been a lot of the degradation of the nuclides because of the half-lives of the waste and a lot of the shorter half-lives. But if I do that calculation, I've got about 1.6 million curies that's in place in Area G today. And then if you look at the brown line, that's basically, again, the decay of the nuclides over time. But you can see, and I drew this, I had them draw this curve out for 100 years, but it basically shows the total curies, or the short-lived curies, dropping to about 13,000 curies. And then if you look at the plutonium equivalent curies, so this is the green line. So the green line, you can see that really steep degradation. Well, that's not because of half-lives, because certainly transuranics are long-lived nuclides, but that's because of all the work in excavating out the transuranic waste. And so within the next several years, as we complete that work, that's really what it does to the PE curies. So it basically, on the scale on the right side of this, it takes it from roughly 80,000 to 100,000 down to about 6,400 PE curies. And the reason for that is we believe there was some transuranic waste put in pits and trenches in the early days before there were no requirements. And I think you have to keep in mind, with starting disposal in 1957, there were no RCRA regulations. There weren't formal regulations for control of hazardous waste and things like that.
Jeff, I have a question. In terms of inventory, do we have a pretty accurate list of what's in the pits, what's in the trenches, and what's in the shafts?
Well, certainly over time the records got better as the requirements under the regulations became promulgated. There were better records kept. This inventory, we do have a pretty good a record of the inventory and amounts that were put down there just from the records of how big the pits were and things like that, Carlos. But in the early days, the records certainly weren't as good as what is kept and controlled today.
It's my understanding that there's a reactor in one of the shafts?
Yeah, I believe there's a small, I think it's a small reactor parts.
And I guess that leads up to my next question. I'm understanding that Savannah River recently pulled a reactor out of a shaft there. Is there anything that we can learn from what they just went through to help us with that?
Certainly going forward in the shafts, and we're looking at as Lee talked about earlier, the environmental assessment associated with the shafts and making sure that we were taking into account all information. But there's been shaft disposal work that's been done at Idaho. There's been shaft disposal recovery work, that's been done at Richland. And I'm not certain of the specifics at Savannah River, but at those sites, if we do go in, we're going to learn every lesson that those 3 sites had to go through in the recovery of the waste from their shafts.
Jeff, before we leave the green hockey stick chart, yeah, I'm over here.
Okay.
The reason for the rapid decline is the 3706 campaign and what
Not just
else?
3706, but I think we really drew the line with what's below grade, which is about 100,000 PE curies today. And so that represents what we've got below grade in the pits, the trenches, and the shafts.
Mr. Chair, Jeff, if you can explain real quick, because we have a larger number of audience members this time, this meeting, which is great. Can you just take like a minute or two to explain how any of these trenches, the pits, any of these devices are lined, or kind of just the composition of them? Of the
Yeah,
containers?
they're not lined.
Thank you.
So
Jeff?
next, yep, I'm sorry.
I've got a question for you. The CAB submitted a recommendation 2 or 3 years ago for cleanup of the 33 shafts, and we have never received a response to that other than, well, we're going to have to wait for NMAD, we're going to have to wait for this. And I just wonder if there has been anything else that you could report that would give us a handle as to what's happening with the 33 shafts now.
Yeah, I know we're doing the NEPA work, and I'll let Lee's the federal project director who's kind of overseeing that right now. I'll let him talk about it.
Sure, real quickly. We did receive it, we did respond, and we committed to actually doing additional analysis beyond the SWICE, the site-wide EIS, to evaluate additional alternatives for the 33 shafts. Currently, the SWICE has us removing those. This additional analysis would look at other alternatives, including but not limited to partial removal, full removal, and or not removing any of the shafts, and that was committed in the form of an environmental analysis that we would conduct under the NEPA regulations. So we've been waiting for, the last couple of years we've put all our funding towards 3706. That's coming down very quickly, successfully. It looks like we're going to meet our goals. And Pete, I think we kind of set you up for this question in that, earlier before you came in as to when that EA might be executed and when we might be able to start that analysis.
Yeah, it's our intent to move forward with that analysis as soon as possible. The primary factor that prevented us from doing that was funding. I'll talk a little bit about the budget in the time I have allotted a little later in this session. Jeff and I are in the process of going through almost project by project, process by process now to figure out what's going to get funded in 14 and what's not. So I don't know if I could commit to a specific date, but it's certainly a priority for us.
as time goes on, that funding will not increase, and it's going to be tempting to say, well, we'll leave the shafts where they're at.
What I'd like to say is that certainly there's potential for funding decreasing or increasing or remaining stable. I'm not able to predict that, but what I'd like to say is that we would like to look to the environmental analysis that Lee just referred to help guide us in whatever decision we make.
Would it be beneficial for the CAB to submit a new recommendation with some innovative ideas as to how to go about doing this in a way that is fiscally responsible, and also will do work that will not get people irradiated or anything? Or is this, would this be something that would really not be something we should not do? Because you have your own ways and we have our ways.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to say what the CAB can or cannot do or should or shouldn't do. You know, the CAB has a charter, and I'm sure it follows that charter and moves forward in a manner it feels is appropriate. What I can share with you is that as we move forward through the NEPA process, we can certainly brief the CAB and make the CAB and the public aware of opportunities to participate in that process. And the CAB is certainly welcome to, within the frame of its charter, prepare resolutions as it sees fit.
Bob, what I'll commit to you is that we'll take a look at that old recommendation on the 33 shafts, and we'll take a look at the information that you recently submitted for review to the members. And Allison and I have just talked about meeting and discussing just that to see if we can come up with new recommendations on the 33 shafts or revisit the old ones. And if there's anybody else on the board that wants to participate on this ad hoc review of the possible recommendation on 33 shafts, just let me know.
Pete, I was just unclear in your answer to Bob if you were saying you needed funding to get the analysis done, or you need an analysis done to see if there could be funding. And I would like to remind those of the CAB members that weren't here, when I did hear this, is that, Bob was there when they did put those shafts in. I think you had mentioned that, and he's a plethora of information. So, not that he can give all the information, and he's able to give all that information, but again, do you need funding to get the analysis, or has to be analysis done to be able to get that funding?
I apologize if it's unclear. We need funding to do the analysis, and last year we did not have adequate funding. As I'll share in a minute, the funding this year, what we received is actually above the President's request, and so Jeff and I are looking at how to best utilize that money, and we do that in conjunction with developing an annual work plan with the Environment Department, but I fully expect this is one of the things we'll be discussing.
Thank you very much.
And if I can just quickly, to get us all on the same page on the 33 shaft CAB recommendation, we had an older recommendation that had 5 or 6 specific suggested pathways for disposal. It was 2 or 3 or 4 years old. We basically resubmitted that same recommendation, asking about a more specific response about future pathways, and we got a response that was not specific to those former suggestions or ideas, but it was in sync with what our request was, i.e. to do the analysis currently, which is happening with the SWEIS, and to take into account newer technologies, other technologies, what other labs, other contractors do. So we did receive on the response affirmation of our articulation of what the approach would be. So that was basically what happened on the last recommendation. It was a resubmittal of a very specific, older recommendation. The specifics were never really responded to, partly because the analysis is being done to freshly characterize what the problem is and what potential solutions might be. But we did receive a positive affirmation in terms of the approach. Thanks.
Okay. We'll keep moving forward. The next thing I've got is just a kind of a, I put this into a timeline, but it got confusing because I wanted a little more data in it. So I just broke it down to kind of the period since 1957 of what kind of the waste types that have been put into Area G. And you can see in the early years from 57 through 1970, there was really not a distinction made between low-level waste or transuranic waste. There was not a requirement to characterize the chemical constituents until 1980. So the information that we have available is really from the disposal records of the waste that was placed in, and then limited generator records that go back one step on that. And then, like I said, we do know the sizes of the pits and the trenches and things like that, and where the waste was coming from during those times. 71 through 79, certainly you're aware, in 1970 DOE 71 timeframe, DOE decided not to discontinue land disposal of transuranic waste. So that decision, or that distinguishing mark, was made. LANL began to limit disposal of the transuranic waste in that period. Also at that time, characterization started to stand up in terms of assay radiochemistry, calorimetry. Was combined with process information similar to what we use today. And still during that time frame, there was really no requirement to characterize chemical constituents. So a lot of the low-level waste may or was contaminated with what we call today under RCRA hazardous constituents. Chemical waste, you know, we had different facilities at Los Alamos that disposed of different waste. This was really a solid waste facility. Only a very limited amount of liquid waste went into this facility, so things weren't really poured in or piped in or things like that. That, as a lot of times is associated with chemical waste. But that there was really, during that time frame, limited disposal of chemical waste at MDAG. And then present, really 80 through present on the hazardous waste. Hazardous waste is not disposed on site except for what's occurred in the past inadvertently in Pit 29 and Shaft 124. So transuranic waste, 1980 to present. Again, we began characterization of the waste, chemical constituents, some characterization on that. And really by 1980, we were no longer disposing of any transuranic waste on site. And in fact, you know, the framework agreement, the waste that we've characterized as transuranic that went in below grade as basically storage as waste that we're going now to get back up, that was placed into below grade storage post 1970. 1980 through 1990, low level waste. This is really, RCRA began to take effect in that time, but for most of the period, we did have records of the waste that went in there and process information that helped us understand, but still there was no, during that time as RCRA came into effect, there was no requirement here to characterize the chemical constituents. 1991 through present, continuing low-level waste disposal, and as I was forthright in the beginning, we're still continuing to dispose of small amounts of low-level waste at Area G today. The waste is characterized, hazardous waste determinations are done under RCRA, and we basically ensure that there are no hazardous waste constituents within the low-level waste that's being disposed. 91 through present on mixed low-level waste, similar to what I just said, but since 1991, mixed low-level waste is no longer disposed on-site. As you know, it requires mixed low-level waste or hazardous waste subject to land disposal restriction, and requires, even past that, requires a Subtitle C disposal facility, which we do not operate at Los Alamos. So that's kind of a snapshot of the waste that makes up that roughly 300,000 cubic meters of waste that I talked about in the presentation. And so we've got all that information, but that's certainly not the primary way. That was one of the pieces of information that we used to characterize the Area G site, but really predominantly not the whole thing. We don't need to know what's in every drum, nor do we know that. And so I've got really 7 pieces of site characterization here. I'll walk through with you as we get into questions on some of this. As we complete the discussion, I've got a number of my folks here from the technical side and from the regulatory side that can help explain a little bit of this. But it really starts with the site geology and the hydrology. We've got a lot of boreholes, and I'll show you the map on the boreholes, but the boreholes are really used to kind of bore in and collect sediments, and then from those bore sediments, we can see and if there's any hazardous or radiological constituents. We do straight hole bores. We also do some slant bores, so if we want to get under a pit or something like that, we'll basically slant in under that. So we get a lot of information of is the waste migrating or isn't it migrating by doing that. Surface soil and stormwater analysis, so soil samples from the tops, certainly for all the runoff, part of our monitoring program. Pore gas analysis, so we'll drill boreholes and then basically put those under suction and basically suck out gases, look for VOC analytes in those gases. Groundwater monitoring, and then moisture monitoring, and finally, like I just talked about, the waste disposal records and kind of what we know was put in that facility over time. What's that? Oh, VOC is volatile organic compound. So that's basically things like TCE, which I can't exactly say out, and TCA, but basically different volatile organic chemical constituents is what we see in the vapor. Thanks. Sorry, I speak in a lot of acronyms, and I apologize for that. So we've got well-characterized geology today. We learn a lot from about the geology as we went through the collection of the sediments in the boreholes. The geological samples shows us kind of the orientation of the geology. In addition to that, a lot of the boreholes and the pore gas, we learn a lot about the Vados zone, which is really the zone between the top and as we go down before we get to the groundwater. We know we do not, we don't have perch zones in there and things like that. But we believe we understand the geology below Area G quite well. That presents kind of a cutaway of what that looks like. Groundwater on the water tables down about 800 feet is where we first start to see groundwater. Daniel?
Chairman, thank you. Mr. Musso, on one of the prior slides, though, from I guess 91 to present, so there's no new generated waste being stored on Area G?
So there's no, except for the low-level waste, there's no waste that's being disposed at Area G. We're still using Area G as kind of we've got the above-grade transuranic waste there today, and so we basically have been dispositioning that waste. The way we're oriented right now is newly generated waste, say from TA55 or from CMR, comes down to Area G. We go through the characterization processes, that goes into storage and then ships out of Area G. But in terms of disposal, we're not disposing of anything except for small amounts of low-level waste.
So it's primarily used as a staging area until it can be relocated?
Yeah, and not, and I guess, Daniel, not real heavily. I mean, there's not trucks and trucks coming in and out of there and things like that. Our generation rate of the newly transuranic waste is somewhere between 400 and 600 drums a year, something like that. So it's not a lot of waste. And again, one of the agreements under the framework agreement was really focused on not accumulating newly generated waste. So in addition to getting rid of the above grade, say 3706, we've got commitments in the framework agreement to get rid of the FY12 and the FY13 new generated by the end of this year too.
Mr. Chairman, so what you are storing there as far as low level, are you lining the ground right now? How are you
So
disposing of that?
pit 39 is not a lined pit, it's an unlined pit. That waste is disposed in accordance of what's called a performance assessment and a composite analysis, which is basically an analysis of the risk of the disposal of that waste. It looks at really the geology, the migration of that waste to any receptors. And I know at one time there was a request for a briefing on and that's all done under a DOE order. Pete's going to talk just a teeny bit about it because we got to do some closure under that, along with under the consent order. But we would be happy. I didn't want to do it today because this is a pretty big topic. But we would be happy to come back and really go through the details of what the performance assessment composite analysis process is that allows us to continue to dispose of the low-level waste under DOE requirements.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask the question concerning technical capability. When you've got a lot of data here that was done in earlier times, and the lab had a very powerful radiochemistry and chemistry background, and they were funded for it. Has their capability to do technical work dwindled or grown?
Yeah, I don't know that it's fair of me to comment on that. I will say the technical expertise, the sample analysis, the hydrology, the geology, really senior scientific technical support that we need, we get. I've got Danny Katzman here today that can answer technical questions, but I think I've got some of the best people that we have, you know, in the DOE system or maybe in the country that are involved or will be involved in things like this problem or the chromium, you know, the chromium problem and what's going on there. So I do think I do think we have good capabilities, but I'm not. I've been here about 3 years now, so I can't. It's hard for me to go back, and as long as, you know, including you, have been here to do a comparison of that. The next thing I'd talk about. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just had a quick question. Oh wait, hold on. Yeah. So and I know none of us can. When I'm of the mindset, you know, I've been on the cab for maybe 2 years or so, of, you know, there seemed to be some feeling, and I'm not speaking into absolutes here, but there seemed to be some feeling that better not to dislodge the 33 shafts because it could put people in danger. So that's why we're going through the whole analysis and all that. But I just wanted to ask, because I know Carlos had mentioned the thing about a nuclear reactor possibly being in there, and then sometimes I hear we don't really know. So my questions are, what is a small nuclear reactor? Because I think you had said that possibly was there. And then, if I was hearing it right, do we know or do we not know exactly what is in the 33 shafts?
So, I believe Mr. Hinkle's in our audience right now. He could probably tell us the exact shaft and the point of location. In fact, I know he knows that number, which shaft it's in, and it's in the top of the reactor. It's called the lamprey reactor. Lamprey is an acronym for, I have it written down somewhere. I have some of the original records. It's absolutely there. It was a sodium reactor, and it was emptied out, so the reactor vessel was disposed of in the top of one of those shafts. And am I correct, Mr. Hinckley?
Actually, it's a single shaft, and it's about 16,000 pounds concrete inside the reactor, and then the reactor is in the whole shaft is concrete in the ground.
Okay, so it's a it's an independent, yes, there's no fuel in it. It was an independent shaft disposal all in its own self. And it was a research reactor for deep space, was that correct?
I believe so.
Okay.
I think that's okay.
So, and one of the things that's interesting with all the true waste that we've managed is we don't do chemical characterization. We have enough records of what was put in there that the Carlsbad Central Characterization Program can completely characterize our waste 99% of the time without any additional chemical characterization. When we removed the 16 RH shafts when I first got here, the records were so precise that it acknowledged that there was half a lead brick in one of those shafts, which did make it RCRA regulated, and we had to work with the state on that very issue, that we had the records down into what's in the 33 shafts. These are associated shafts down to the half brick. The Los Alamos National Laboratory, this was all research work, and the whole point was to maintain records and understand radiochemistry, radioactivity, and how all these materials interacted. So we do have records of what in. There's very little unknown of what went into Area G, even in the older cases. A lot of you were involved with MDAB, which was truly a industrial-ish type landfill. I helped close that this year. Last fiscal year, I helped close that. And in that case, we had the mystery Jeep and the mystery truck. We're really going to find it. Were we going to find ordnance in there? Were there compressed gas cylinders? There's a lot of unknown with that project, and that really was a true dump. I hate to say that. Area G is a managed landfill, and we do have good records, and it's nice that we have that we don't have to do a lot of characterization. We can literally go back to the records, and to meet the WHIP waste acceptance criteria, without additional chemical analysis, I think says a lot to what we really know about what's in Area G.
And in response to your question, it's not really a nuclear reactor that's down there. It's only the ghost of one.
The vessel, yeah, yes.
The next map I have here shows the boreholes. I talked about the boreholes, both straight drilled and slant drilled. We've got about 40 boreholes. This slide shows the locations that are spaced all around Area G, and this information was used for really characterization of the site. We looked at it, for basically releases of any radiological constituents from the pits and trenches. Our data shows minimal release and really consistent with very low moisture content that we come up with the pore gas analysis I'll show you in just a minute, and consistent with what we've learned on really limited migration of highly migratable chemicals like the VOCs, and I'll talk about one of those in just a minute.
Are these boreholes all the same depth and same angle, or they're wildly different?
They're not. They're all different, and they're all basically, they were technically engineered to get into one certain thing or to learn one thing. So in one, we may have wanted to get under a pit or a trench and see something else, and another one we may be, say, running down along a shaft or something. Again, this one is the Vados zone, so we're looking really at pore gas monitoring on this. We've got roughly 20 pore gas monitoring boreholes that we've drilled around Area G. They were really drilled to characterize and monitor the vapor phase of VOCs, volatile organic compounds, in the Vados zone, really beneath the pits and trenches. So they're looking to see if we've got any chemical migration. we've been monitoring these, so this wasn't something done yesterday. This is, we've had these, or a number of these, for a couple of decades now. Really shows contaminants that are not migrating, and I guess what my technical folks characterize this as a pulse released, as opposed to ongoing migration of the contaminant. This just shows the two areas that we do have the VOC contamination from the poor gas and the site characterization. One thing to note in the CME report, we recommend remediation for both of these through using some type of a soil vapor extraction to basically extract the chemical out in the vapor phase. So this is one of the, if people think we're just doing an engineering cap and things like that, we've looked at specific releases in there that we've learned from our site investigation, that there's going to be different things done to take care of some of the problems, a problem like this. Other one, groundwater monitoring used in site characterization. So this map, you can see MDAG that's shown there in a little smaller scale, but the red dots around there show the wells that we have in place for groundwater monitoring down to the regional aquifer. We've got about 3 upgradient wells that are at the top side of the oval, and then about 5 downgradient wells that are at the bottom side of that oval. So we've had those in place. Not only were they used for really characterization to see if anything had got down to that point, but we continue to do monitoring on each and every one of those wells today.
Jeff, I noticed that there's no monitoring wells on St. I property. Do they have wells of their own, or have we talked to them about maybe having the possibility of placing wells on their property?
Yeah, we don't have any wells on St. I property today, and on this one, Dave, have we discussed that at all with them, or have they?
We know enough about that aquifer there to know that the subsurface flow of those waters is away from San Ildefonso, so that's why we border to the south and to the east of the facility.
Okay, so what Dave said for the record was that if you look at the water flow, the groundwater flow is away from the San I Pueblo, basically goes down gradient from kind of top left to bottom right is how it flows.
Excuse me, I have a question about that, because NMED in its response seemed to question that assertion and said that, in fact, there was a need for additional wells to the northwest of Area G, towards the Buckman well field and towards San Ildefonso. And I guess they asked for that well several years ago, at least one well. What's the status on that, and why hasn't it been drilled yet?
Danny? Yes, sir. Can you step up to the microphone just so we can get it on the record?
I don't know if there's a pointer here that might help. What Alex is talking about, if you look at the oval and you look at the letters area G/MDAG, just to the right of that is a well called R41. You can see it if you look closely on the figure there. Thanks, Jeff. There is, in our existing data beneath that general area, some of the recent data show what looks like it could be a little perturbation in the water table in that general area that led NMED to recommend or actually require a well to the west, sort of west-northwest of R41 to kind of fill a gap in the sort of the completeness of the monitoring network ultimately. Our correspondence to the Environment Department suggested that although we didn't necessarily dispute the need for that well, the well at this time didn't change anything about our recommendations for the remedy. And so we proposed to the Environment Department that they continue to process the remedy and that we would evaluate the need for that well as part of long-term monitoring, sort of performance monitoring once the remedies are decided and in place. So there is an outstanding well west of 41, R41, to sort of ultimately complete what may be anticipated to be a long-term performance monitoring network for the site.
And Danny, has NMED responded to your
Yes,
response?
they've responded that
And
the
what-
extension requests were
To drill the
accepted.
well? To drill the well?
The extension to drill the well and consider it post-CME statement of basis was accepted.
And didn't they also require some additional testing of some of the wells out there to establish that they are actually in communication with groundwater?
Which wells? I'm not sure about that, Alex.
It's in their comments for the CME. I don't have the specific well numbers with me right now. I can go to my car and get the CME.
I'm not sure what you mean by connection to the groundwater.
Well, they questioned whether or not some of the wells that you were using for monitoring the regional wells were actually in communication with groundwater.
That doesn't sound familiar to me. I mean, all of our regional aquifer wells are very clearly in communication with groundwater in the regional aquifer. There's simply no question about that. And to my knowledge, NMED has not contested that question or that issue.
And then didn't NMED with respect to that one well say that the majority contaminants emanating from ground G, area G, could actually be missed if that well was not in place?
I don't recall a comment like that.
They did say that. It's in there.
That the majority of contaminants could be missed?
Yes, they actually said a large majority of contaminants could be missed.
I'm not familiar with that comment.
Sorry, what is CME that you guys are speaking of?
Real quick, the location west of R41, is that on lab property or Sanai?
That would be on lab
It's on
property.
lab property.
The San Ildefonso boundary on that map is shown as the orange jagged line off
that
to
yellow
the
line.
north of Area G.
So there's no well yet?
So there's,
San Ildefonso,
there-
not one.
Lanel actually does, or I'm sorry, there are wells that the laboratory put on San Ildefonso land far to the north of the site and in no way related to the investigations of TA-54. It's not named. Scott asked what the number of that well was, and it's not named.
So this is the kind of the results or some of the information that's presented in the CME and the investigation reports that have been put together from the Phase 1 RCRA investigation that was done in the early to mid-'90s, the consent order investigation under the 2005 consent order, and then just supplemental information that was put together in 2007. As I've said so far, there's no evidence of regional groundwater contamination, and we believe, so kind of going back through with the waste records, with the site investigation between the boreholes, the poor gas, the groundwater monitoring, moisture monitoring, the soil, and runoff. Those things together, we believe we have sufficient data to provide really a basis to move forward on selection of analysis of remedies for the site, and then basically providing a recommendation for for an engineering corrective action approach for this area. The other thing I'd like to, this kind of goes back a little bit to the briefing last year that we did, but we do continue to do monitoring on all our groundwater wells, on our poor gas. We're always looking for any evidence of contamination that's in that. And then, so you guys, I mean, Area G's been in the news a lot and things like that lately. The work, we've got field work going on at Area G today. That's where the transuranic waste above ground storage is. Our focus on cleanup right now really is a risk-based approach, and we're addressing what we and what the state of New Mexico Environmental Department consider to be the highest risk, and that's that above-grade stored transuranic waste that is combustible or dispersible in event of a fire. And I'll just say, especially with the, this is my third winter in New Mexico, and each year it seems to get drier. And with the dryness and the drought continuing, what I think is probably going to be a fairly significant fire year, I'm pretty happy that we've focused on the problem that's there today, and we've made the progress like we've talked about, and I'll give an update today on that, of getting that waste off the top of the mesa at Area G.
Your slide, the slide prior to this says no substantial evidence of regional groundwater contamination. This slide says no evidence of groundwater beneath TA 54 is contaminated. Are those statements saying the same thing, or?
Danny, is there any, I don't think there's any difference, so I think we used an adjective there we probably didn't need, but we don't have evidence. Okay, I'm going to turn it over. Oh, sorry.
Excuse me. Before you leave, go back to that last slide. Down there, you saying you're beginning work on below-grade true removal. Could you?
Yep. So we.
What that is right now. If
So.
that's started.
So we haven't started the field operations associated with that, but we've done a lot of the engineering methods of how we're going to retrieve the first piece of below-grade transuranic contaminated waste. And what we're going to do, we've got what's called corrugated metal pipes, and these are just like you'd see in a ditch, a corrugated metal pipe, but that pipe was filled with kind of a sludge that there was cement added, and it became really a cemented form in that corrugated metal pipe. We've got about little over 150 of those. We'd like to begin retrieval of those this year. We've got a framework agreement interim measure that we need to have, I think, 250 cubic meters out by the end of fiscal year 15. We need to get started and rolling with that work to meet that mark. This will be the first piece that we tackle on this. So we're going to finish up 3706. I'll talk about it a little more later, but we're going to work on clearing the deck of all the other any other transuranic waste that's at Area G above grade, and starting on the removal of the corrugated metal pipes this year. So.
Mr. Chairman, it's about 3:30 now, and Jeff, bless his heart, used all my time. But just kidding. With your permission, I'd like to keep going. We've got about another 8 or 10 slides.
Please do.
Okay. So I'd like to talk a little bit about, to start, the regulatory process. And there are two main things that we need to comply with and meet. The first is the consent order investigation and remediation process, and the second is DOE Order 435.1 that addresses radioactive waste and the management of that waste. If I say anything about the consent order that is incorrect, or I would certainly defer to the Environment Department regarding that, and then I have some staff that will hopefully keep me on the straight and narrow that are in the audience about the DOE process. So this slide depicts the corrective measures evaluation process. You've heard Jeff refer to CMEs, and people have asked about CMEs. That refers to the corrective measures evaluation process. For those of you familiar with the Superfund or CERCLA process, it's roughly equivalent to the remedy selection or ROD process there. And it's a bit of an eye chart, I apologize, but a couple things I wanted to draw to your attention. I'll see if I can get this pointer to work here. In instances where there's a little loop back, that indicates a process where we submit a report, the Environment Department reviews it, and then can either approve it or disapprove it or approve it with modifications. So the first part here is a historical, it's an investigation work plan and historical investigation report. That's basically where we tell NMED everything that we know about that site to date. Then there's an investigation report where we update that with newly collected information. And then we finally develop and submit a corrective measures evaluation report. And this is, we have completed this task, and NMED is in the process of reviewing the CME. I believe, Jeff, we had 3 revisions for the CME?
Yeah.
So
The current revision out there is Rev 3, so we had 2 notices of deficiency that we responded to as we started the CME process.
So that's kind of where we're at, and then these yellow or gold boxes depict areas where the public can have input into the process. After NMED selects the remedy and issues what is called a statement of basis, the inappropriate acronym there is SOB, then we go over to the public comment. So when we do a corrective measures evaluation, and these things are usually large enough that they'll hold your front door open on a windy day, there are threshold criteria that need to be met and balancing criteria need to be met. And the threshold criteria you can read: protect human health, protect the environment, achieve cleanup standards, source control so that there will be no future releases, and then comply with waste management regulations. Pretty straightforward. The balancing criteria are used to identify the recommended alternative, because when we submit a CME to the state, I think the last Rev had, gosh, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think it may have had as many as 12 potential remedies. And one of the comments and criticisms that NMED had on our earlier corrective measures evaluations is they said we did not evaluate enough different remedies. So they directed us to go back and do more homework and come up with different alternatives. So they also look at the long-term reliability effectiveness, reduction of toxicity, mobility and volume, effectiveness, implementability, and then also cost is a factor, or a balancing criteria factor that's considered. This is just a real quick summary of some of the alternatives that we considered, and I wanted to share some of the estimated costs and durations to give the board an idea of the range of options that we looked at. In NEPA, there's always a no-action alternative, so you look at what happens if you just don't do anything, and that wouldn't cost much and wouldn't take much time, obviously. All the way down to an alternative where we excavated the pits and shafts, did soil vapor extraction, and then institutional controls, and you see an estimated cost of $29 billion with a B and 30 years to execute. And then alternatives in between. Most of them included engineered caps, evapotranspiration caps. I know we looked at a chemical area management unit, CAMU, and other things. So these numbers here give you an idea of the duration and time and the estimated cost. Now this estimated cost here raised several eyebrows and has been the recipient of some criticism as being extraordinarily high and unrealistic, and in some instances folks have said, well, Department of Energy came up with that number because they really didn't want to do that alternative, and they figure if they just made the number high enough, they wouldn't have to. And there's a lot that goes into this number. I'm not prepared to defend it today, but things that go into that number would be, for example, off-site disposal of the waste. Well, that's a multi-billion-dollar, essentially, disposal fee, ultimately. Contingency. If you're looking at a construction project that's of this magnitude and this duration, you're going to have a fairly significant amount of contingency in that. Things like overhead, things like adder costs, they just get multiplied to such a high level when you're looking at an engineering project that would be this great. And if the CAB wants us to come back and talk more about the specifics and the cost estimates and stuff like that, we certainly could. But these aren't final cost estimates by any stretch. When the Environment Department issues a statement of basis, selects a final remedy, some of the other steps in that process include the department developing a corrective measures implementation plan, which basically is a cost and schedule for how we would implement the remedy. And in that instance, that's when these numbers would be refined to a much greater detail.
Pete?
Yes.
In terms of dollars, I guess what I don't see here, and kind of hoping that some of the rest of the board members would want to see, as well as I want to see, is maybe a mixture of both of those alternatives in terms of, is there 90, 95% easily retrievable within the M dollar figure, and then maybe 10 to 15 or 5% of something that's not so easily retrievable that fits into that 29B figure, and maybe a combination that you can work up and show the board that kind of works both into another option?
Mr. Chairman, what I might offer is maybe a separate discussion where we go over the alternatives in a little more detail, because that might give you, the board, an opportunity to look at what was proposed and why, and if the board feels like there were alternatives, quite frankly, that we didn't include or should have included, that would like to be included, we can have that discussion possibly as well.
Do you have a place in mind where that waste could go? I mean, if New Mexico doesn't want it, is there somebody else who would be willing to take it even?
I'll probably seek Jeff's help here.
So there's a couple things. So within the excavation alternative, we looked at the majority of that waste being mixed low-level waste, so it was radiological waste that was mixed with hazardous constituents, or we wouldn't be able to prove through characterization methods that a listed waste hadn't contacted radiological waste. So if you look at the facilities that are in the United States today for both the treatment and the disposal of that type of waste, there's only two. There's Energy Solutions Facility up in Clive, Utah, and there's Waste Control Specialists down in Andrews, Texas. Certainly the amount of waste that you're looking at here would be probably a substantial amount to either facility. I haven't compared whether it's within their permit, but those are the two facilities that can take at least mixed low or very different types of mixed low level waste today. I wouldn't say that what they could accept is comprehensive to what we have disposed.
A quick question. Was the excavation alternative in versions 1 or 2 of the CME, or only in Rev 3?
I think the excavation alternatives were in all of the three. What occurred was during the REV process, we added alternatives to the analysis. So,
another question. When you're considering the cost of a no-action alternative, wouldn't you have to take into account the cost of whatever continued monitoring or maintenance you might need to maintain the area in its current situation, and the possible cost of remediating any problems that would occur if you did opt to take no action?
I see your point. The no-action alternative was meant to indicate just leaving it as is. If leaving it as is incurred some direct costs or expenditures, I don't believe that we had factored in the ongoing groundwater monitoring and things like that. So.
In NMED's review of CME2, they said that Lionel failed to provide a detailed description of the costs that it presented for each alternative. Was that addressed in CME3?
We believe it was, yes.
Okay, so they basically talked about the costs associated with removal, transport, excavation, and so all those costs were broken down?
I believe they were, and I believe that the costs that we submitted were appropriate. as I indicated, when we do the corrective measures implementation, there would be a separate cost estimate that would include, independent cost estimates and reviews and things like that. It would be much more of a detailed engineering estimate, and that level of detail wasn't necessarily included in the CME, nor is it required. Okay.
Are you referring to the preliminary design that they requested?
No, I'm referring to the CMI. When you get to the CMI phase, corrective measures implementation plan, that's basically a plan that defines the schedule and scope associated and cost associated with implementing the remedy, and that's more of a final design. I believe what we submitted to the Environment Department in Rev 3 with regard to the cost estimate was appropriate.
Okay, thanks.
I had a sense that slide would get some questions. So with regard to the remedy that we proposed as our proposed remedy, it was an engineering evapotranspiration landfill cover that would contain a biointrusion barrier and would be enhanced with native vegetation. In addition, so that would be for the entire 63 or 64 acres, I believe. Then we would have targeted soil vapor extraction. Jeff, in his presentation, had a cross-section that showed two areas, which we would address. So we would, SVE stands for soil vapor extraction. So our proposed remedy, or preferred remedy, included that. And then long-term monitoring and maintenance to verify the integrity and long-term performance of the ET cover. It's very important when these types of landfill covers are constructed that there is a monitoring and maintenance plan that goes along with that, because the success and performance of that cover is directly related to the integrity of the cap, the ability of vegetation to grow, to not have situations where there might be differential subsidence or cracking in the cap, which could reduce the cap integrity. So the closure, post-closure, maintenance, and monitoring aspect of a remedy like this is in my opinion, pretty significant.
100 years is a long time to commit to something. How confident are you, or what kind of safeguards would be built in place to ensure that you could keep on doing that for 100 years, or could fix it if something needed to be fixed after 60 or 70 years?
It's my recollection that this property, that's a fair question, because it would be my kids or grandkids doing it, right? And as much as I trust them, when I tell them to clean their room, I also verify. So this property isn't a piece of property that's anticipated to be subject to land transfer or anything like that. I anticipate this property to be in the Department of Energy's ownership for a very long period of time. And given that, we would have a long-term relationship with it and stewardship with it, and we would have to develop plans and follow through on those plans. And we're going to be on the hook for doing work here for a very long period of time.
Is 100 years anywhere long enough? And also, what do you do with the volatile organics and the tritium once you extract it?
Yeah, probably looking out into the future, it's hard, like Pete had, to answer. 100 years is quite a long time. Certainly on this side, I would, if I was here 100 years from now, I would guess to look at it and see that monitoring would continue with it, with the radionuclides there. What was the second? I'm sorry, Nona, what was the second?
Oh, the second part is what is done with the volatile organic compounds and the tritium when you extract them? Or after you extract them, how is it disposed of or dealt with?
So we extract the the VOCs as a vapor, we change it back into a liquid phase, and it's dispositioned as a hazardous or a mixed waste at that point. Tritium, Danny, I don't know, I'm not.
I'm sorry, both of these are extracted and they're collected on resins and basically disposed of that way. So the tritium's
Tritium
there,
would be the same.
and VOCs are all collected and disposed of in accordance with all appropriate hazardous waste regulations.
So on the VOCs, it's like a carbon bed or something like that.
Right.
Is
Right. It's actually, the VOC area of contamination would probably all ultimately fit in such a tiny container. It's very small in the sense of pounds of contaminants that are actually out in the environment. Very, very small amount.
Typically thermally treated and destroyed. And the cartoon to the right depicts a little bit of a cross section as to what that cap would look like and the various components of the cap. So I talked a fair amount here about the corrective measures evaluation process that we're required to go through the consent order and through RCRA. In addition, there's a DOE order that we have to comply with, as I indicated earlier, with respect to radiological contaminants and radiological waste. And also, Jeff mentioned earlier a document called the Performance Assessment and Composite Analysis. We have had meetings in the past in the public. I attended at least one, I know, on this, and this is another area where, again, Mr. Chairman, I would offer that we could return to the CAB and talk in more detail about. But rather than go through this slide in detail, I'll read something that comes out of the third paragraph of the executive summary of Rev 3 of the corrective measures evaluation. It says the performance assessment and composite analysis for Area G will establish the technical requirements for closure needed to meet the performance objectives for radiological protection of the public from radionuclides disposed of at the site. These technical requirements will be incorporated into the design of the final remedy during the corrective measures implementation phase of the project. So what that means is I've got two things I've got to be concerned about as I move forward with the closure of this site. I obviously have to comply with the consent order and the corrective measures evaluations process, but at the same time, in parallel, I need to comply with the DOE order using that performance assessment and composite analysis to make sure that the technical requirements, as indicated to me by the performance assessment and composite analysis, are included within the final remedy design and construction. So we have two things then that have to converge and have to be have to come together and be built in together. And those things converge, but initially kind of get developed on separate paths, because I said I'm using the performance assessment and composite analysis to guide me onto the technical requirements for the DOE order, and I'm using the developments of the remedies, and then NMED uses the proposed remedy, and then those two things need to come together. So path forward, as we indicated, the Environment Department is reviewing the CME and ultimately will issue a statement of basis, and they will public notice that, and there will be opportunities for public hearing and public comment on the selected remedy. At the same time, we have to render a determination as to whether the proposed remedy is protective under the radiological authority that I have, and that was that second piece. And then we need to close the active RCRA units. And then after that, we're going to be, after the statement of basis is issued, we're going to be completing the true campaigns that Jeff had described, the above ground, the below ground. Capital project authorization is kind of code for the internal process that I need to go through as a federal employee to authorize the work to Jeff and his staff in a way that's consistent with the DOE orders that I have to comply with. And then ultimately, we would, once the corrective measures implementation is submitted and approved, we move through by executing the project, ultimately obtaining a certificate of completion from the Environment Department, and then the final step would be removing the facility or the MDAG from the hazardous waste permit, and I'm talking years and years and years out now. This isn't going to happen before Christmas or next Christmas. This is going to be a very complicated, technically challenging project, and that's kind of what I wanted to leave you with in the summary. This isn't a slam dunk. This is the biggest landfill we have at the laboratory. Jeff showed you all the characterization data that was associated with it. It's a lot of work from a lot of people over a long period of time to get where we are now, and there's going to be a lot more work to get us to where we need to be in the future. We realize that this affects a lot of people. We realize that a lot of people have opinions on this. We have to comply with a couple of different things during the process, both with NMED, the consent order, the DOE orders. What we will commit is to be open, to be as complete and transparent as we can be. And through those processes that I've laid out, we're going to move forward. Final decisions will be reached, and we'll take an action-based cleanup. I feel that everything that we've done to date, Jeff talked about the true waste, the 3706, the true waste removal campaign, addressing the highest risk and the highest priorities first. That's the approach that I think professionally makes the best sense, and that's the direction I hope that we'll continue with in the future. So, Mr. Chairman, we've gone on well beyond our time, but this isn't a presentation I think that could be made quickly or simply, because there's just so much there. And I would also like to offer, Mr. Chairman, that this not be the last presentation, that if the CAB's pleasure to have a presentation on the remedies, have a presentation on the performance assessment composite analysis, things like that, I would certainly look forward to receiving those requests and responding to them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just out of curiosity, Pete, you mentioned having to fit the remediation, the resolution into PACA, but then you have to also merge the consent order into that resolution as well. Just out of curiosity, does NMED use PACA to approve or disapprove the CME?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think, did we submit the performance assessment composite analysis to the environment?
We offered to give them a presentation. They declined. They accepted it as informational purposes when we had a public meeting about 3 years ago at Cities of Gold, and we also had a special presentation to the CAB, which I'm hearing that we probably want to repeat that presentation again as well.
Okay.
I think that was in 2010 where we did the PAC.
Thank you.
I have a quick question about the closure of the active units at Area G. How will that be performed? Is that under your worker permit, or is that going to be part of this entire corrective measure?
To get to the CME process and final closure.
Press the button.
To get to the final corrective measures that we've discussed, we've got to close those units. So as we get done and we start to suspend our operations down there with the legacy waste, as we bring, Tony talked about the new transuranic waste storage facility that we're building up at TA 63. That comes online, we start to bring down all of our operations in G. We're going to go through a period, we'll close our low-level waste disposal that we're doing today, and then we'll go through the closure process on that. So,
Wow, that's incredible. That's a lot of really good information. Well, that's great. I guess we can go ahead and move on now for getting some updates. NMED's not here, but if you want to go ahead and...
Okay, what I'd like to do is just give a quick update on the environmental program work since we were here last time. Safety, well, we continue to do really well. I've talked to you about any accidents that we've had. As we wrote this slide, we'd gone 141 days without a recordable injury. Last week, we did have a injury in our 3706 project. And what happened is we had a worker that was basically carrying a laundry bag of laundry, about 20 pounds. He lifted that laundry bag up to put onto basically a goat cart to take that away, and he felt a pop in his knee. Immediately, he reported that. We got some first aid treatment of some ice on. He went to see his doctor that day or early the next day. They put a restriction on him being able to walk and normally do his job like he'd been doing. So we took that restriction, resulted in a recordable injury. So that's what happened on that. That's the only recordable we've had since we were here last time. The guy's doing okay. He's getting better. The swelling's gone down on the knee. So that's all good news. But we did have to record that under OSHA rules. Also, just to note, I'm a huge advocate of worker-involved safety. I can't be the one up there preaching safety and listing out all the rules. I need people to be involved in that, to take accountability for their own safety, to take accountability for their coworkers' safety, to really become involved and engaged. We do that through what's called a worker safety and security team. These guys they're kind of a self-governing unit, but their focus is on safety improvements and keeping each other safe. At the laboratory, we do what are called Distinguished Performance Awards. There's around a dozen of those awards across the 10,000 workers or numerous teams that are doing work at the laboratory. And one of our worker safety and security teams, with the focus that I just talked about, won one of those distinguished awards for last year. That's really fantastic, but it's really kind of testament to we're doing the right thing, and I think our safety record in the work we're doing also shows the same. So how are we doing on the transuranic waste? So as I put this slide together to come talk to you of the 3,706 cubic meters that were signed up to get out the door, we're now at 3,111, and yesterday we shipped a couple more, so we're at 3,713, not counting today's shipment. A little less than 600 cubic meters remaining. We're just finishing up remediation, so as one of the things we have to do in getting waste to WIP is we have to open all the boxes and drums, we have to inspect the waste, we have to characterize the waste, we have to get any prohibited items out of the waste. We started with 4,495 containers. To complete remediation, we're down to roughly 130 drums left to go, and 14 boxes as the start of this week. So we look to finish that work up early in March. We'll finish up the characterization, the certification of waste. We'll put electronically together all the remaining shipments that have to go to WIP, and as WIP comes online after their maintenance outage the middle of March, we're going to campaign this waste off Los Alamos. So we expect to finish up before the end of June, have this project done and behind us, and looking on to the next things that we have to do for environmental cleanup at the laboratory. So we're in the home stretch, so to speak, and And although things are looking good, we haven't let up any effort. We're continuing to work our around-the-clock operations like I've talked to you guys about. As WIP comes back online, we'll be doing up to 10 shipments a week. That's the most we've ever done out of Los Alamos. We're going to beef up our shipping crews to be able to do that and finish this out. So we've got the support of WIP. Joe Franco is front and center and has said that he'll give us as many shipments as we need to make this complete. So that's all good news. The below-grade waste retrieval, Doug asked the question a little bit about this earlier, but we are preparing to do this. There are 158 corrugated metal pipes, about 30 inches in diameter. Each one's about 20 feet long. They're stored in really shallow land storage in Pit 29 in Area G. We've got a team that's formed and working on the remediation process. What we're looking to do is basically excavate the pipes, basically put them in a cradle or a conveyance device, take them over to our 375 facility. We're installing what's called a diamond wire saw in that facility. We're looking to cut each one of these into a chunk that'll fit into a standard waste box, and that'll be what we end up shipping to WIP. So we're expecting to begin the retrieval of these late this summer, and we'd like to get all of them or most of them out of the ground before freezing conditions so we can go to work in the 375 facility in cutting these up and getting them ready to ship to WIP. So that's the first step. These are probably the easiest piece of waste. If you look at the pits, the trenches, the shafts, things like that, the way we like to work is kind of tackle that, learn as much as we can, and then move to the next harder thing. So that's why we're starting with these. The corrective actions program, we had a successful year, and we're even looking for bigger and better things going into this year. The flood recovery assessment, so the flood that we had in September with the 7 to 8 inches of rain during that week, we have completed an assessment of that. We've put in place basically corrections for a lot of the roads that got washed out or nearly washed out, so we've been doing all of that work. We've been looking at all the canyons. We've been looking at the migration of sediments. We're just set to launch, or we have launched, a sampling campaign, an enhanced sampling campaign, looking at kind of recharacterization based upon sediment changes. So we'll see if there's been any migration of contaminants that was due to this flood. So there's quite a bit of work that's still going on in that. We pumped water at in R21, R42, before that, up until the freezing season. So we've got all that data. Danny Katzman and his band of scientists have been looking at that data. We're working with the state of New Mexico for the next step as an interim action for the chromium contamination in Martin-Dad Canyon. We'll be putting that into place this summer and proceeding along to final CME on that project. We completed the Sandia Canyon grade control structure, basically in-place tiered structure that slows down the migration of water and eases the degradation of the wetland in Sandia Canyon. We got that done just before the floods hit. We took some damage on it because of the floods, but I'll tell you one thing, we probably would have lost that wetland if we hadn't got this grade control structure in place. It basically saved that, which to us was a really big deal because we think quite a bit of the chromium's tied up still into that wetland. So that was a good thing. Completed our first quarter this year of our groundwater sampling and to date submitted 40 of our consent order deliverables on time or ahead of schedule. I think that's it.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the FY14 budget and share with you some thoughts about it. Just by way of background, let's go back to 13 for a minute. The President's budget request for doing environmental cleanup work at Los Alamos was $239 million. We found ourselves in a continuing resolution and then a sequestration on top of that, and when the dust settled, we were down to $173 million. We got bumped back up with a $40 million reprogramming, which was pretty amazing, and I'm still amazed that happened. And it was roughly $20 million on the EM side and $20 million on the NNSA side of the House. And if I'm doing the math correctly, 40 million plus 173 million would be about 213 million is what we wound up at the end of the day working with in FY13. For FY14, the President requested 220 million, and Christmas came a little late this year, but we not only got the President's budget, but we got a $5 million plus up on that for 225 million. Briefly, by comparison, the Office of Environmental Management got about a $200 million plus up from what was anticipated. The total EM budget is $5.8 billion across the complex. And what I think this is attributable to, in part, is that the appropriators recognized that both the EM complex in general and LANL specifically is a sound investment, and it's a good investment. And there are a lot of contributing factors, I think, to that. One is the work that Jeff and his staff has done on the 3706 campaign. Another is that groups like this board, like the Regional Coalition, the congressional delegation, the governor's office, local elected officials, state legislators, I'm trying not to leave anybody out. Citizens groups, community groups, Scott Kovacs, particularly by name, Jay Coughlin. And I'm saying this with a smile on my face because I really believe it's true. Everybody got behind the 3706 campaign. Everybody thought it was a good idea, supported it, and you know, through the lapse in appropriation, through every other obstacle that got thrown in front of Jeff and his staff, I'm cautiously confident that we're going to deliver on it. And it's that kind of support and results that I think resulted in the appropriation that we saw as a cleanup budget here in the omnibus legislation. So very pleased with it, and the credit really goes not to people in this room and to a lot of other folks, not to the Department of Energy per se. A little look ahead at the 15 budget. The pass-back has been received by headquarters, which means that headquarters gets to look at the number and do whatever magic it does. I don't know if it's chicken bones in the microwave or whatever, but ultimately it goes back and the President will announce the budget in early March of 2014. Usually it happens in February. Last year it happened a lot later, but they're anticipating that the President will announce the budget in early March, and the status of that budget is embargoed, which is code for me not being knowledgeable about it, and if I was and I said anything about it, bad things would happen to me. So stay tuned, but early March we'll know what it's looking like for 15. So I think I have just maybe one more slide, and I hope you all can see this. What we've done is we've plotted the presidential requests each fiscal year in blue, going back to 2005, and this is 2014, and the enacted budgets in maroon or brown, and then the percent difference between what was enacted and what was requested. I think that's what that is. Variance of EPO versus enacted. So I'd like to turn your attention to this part of the graph here, because you can see, in general, the President's request has been going up. And in general, what we've gotten and it's been enacted is going in the opposite direction. But this year, even though the President's budget was down a little, we've seen an increase in our appropriation, which we really haven't seen since 2008, 2009. And the level that we're at now, and I'm not, I haven't included I don't think I've included the reprogramming and the Recovery Act, because I don't see another Recovery Act, Stimulus Act coming in the near future. So what I'm suggesting is that this trend here is caused by Jeff's group and the laboratory achieving results, getting cleanups done on budget, on schedule, and LANL being viewed from a legacy cleanup perspective as a good investment. Now, one question I've gotten asked is, if I project it out to 15, 16, and 17, is this going to look like this? And a year or two from now, we're going to say, gosh, you remember that meeting we had at the lodge when we talked about the floor? Those were the good old days, weren't it? I'm hoping that's not the case, but it's certainly possible, or it's possible that we're going to get up here and plateau out, or it's possible that we'll keep going. I don't know, but if the thought is that this increase was in fact due to what I'm suggesting is the delivery, the bias for action, getting that 3706 campaign delivered, looking at the highest risk work at the laboratory, getting support from everyone. Yep, that's what we need to do, getting behind it, doing it and delivering it, completing it and moving forward. If that is the recipe for success moving forward and the model for success moving forward, I want to be able to try and capitalize on that as I move forward with Jeff on planning the additional work, on sequencing the additional work, and on executing the additional work. So that's, Mr. Chairman, what I wanted to say about the budget. And as soon as the 15 numbers are out and we can speak about them, I'd love to come back and tell you what that looks like.
Pete, so what were we thinking in 2007 by only requesting 91 million?
I could say I wasn't here at the time. I could come up with any sorts, and I honestly don't know. But the all seriousness, the resolutions and the letters. I know I saw a lot of letters come past my desk over the last year to congressional members, and I saw them from all different places. They appear to have had a positive impact. So.
Just one other thing, Mr. Chairman. I had the pleasure, I met with all my folks in an all-hands meeting this morning of what we call the LANL True program. So these are the people that are doing all the work on the 3706 and the results that Pete's talked about. And it's really them, and I called them heroes today, and I think that made them happy. But it's them, those guys that get the credit too. They're the ones that are doing the work. They've got the midnight shifts and things like that. They're the ones that are looking out. They're their brother's keeper in terms of safety and things like that. But as we get done with this, we've actually approached the lab director and got a little bit of money for a celebration. But we're gonna. Those folks we need to keep in mind that they're the ones that are setting that performance and have really come through on this. And I think with the budget going forward, a lot of the jobs that we may have lost that these people had, we're going to be able to keep in place, and we're going to keep the cleanup streak, at least in the transuranic waste, going. So, thank you,
Jeff. That leads me to another question. And Lee and I kind of talked about this a little bit, but your staff did such a good job on 3706 that it attracted national attention. Have you had time or thought about what would be the logical next step in terms of another framework agreement? So we submitted a recommendation as a board that said maybe at some point in the near future, NMED and the labs can sit down and take a look at what's left in the consent order and reprioritize that and maybe come up with the next framework agreement. Have you guys thought about
So one of the things, and I'll leave it to Pete of when we come talk to you, but we're taking the lessons of 3706 and how we were successful on that, and as we look at sitting down with the state, like we've talked about, to renegotiate or to look at the consent order, factoring in those lessons, the successful lessons out of 3706. So I think one of those is going to a campaign-based approach. So we don't take all of our money, spread it across everything, and end up not making the visible progress that we'd like. That we take it in a campaign, a risk-based campaign approach, and knock off this, then knock off this, then knock off this. So that's one of the things that we're doing.
Jeff is absolutely correct, and I couldn't agree more with what he just articulated. I made a brief presentation at the Regional Coalition a couple of weeks ago on the budget, and the chairman essentially asked the same question: what's next? Now that I feel like I think the analogy he used was the greyhound chasing the mechanical rabbit, and now we're going to catch it. What do we do next? And I use the dog chasing the pickup truck analogy. It's because I got a dog, but it's the same strategy. And whatever we do next, I'd like to ultimately, I think, there's a lot of value in trying to build it into this campaign-based approach. Things that I mentioned at the Regional Coalition as possibilities, one might be chromium. That's certainly a priority. Jeff talked about the below-ground work that still needs to occur, and there's a lot of wisdom, I think, in trying to optimize the facilities and the infrastructure and the workforce that we have. But the process that we're going to use is the same process that we did last year. We need to come down to Santa Fe and meet with the Environment Department and line up all the work that's left and prioritize it and look at it hopefully based on risk and see what makes the most sense to do. But I want to do that pretty quickly, and I want to start executing pretty quickly because I want to continue to show with that 225 appropriation level that we continue to be a good investment. Once we have that list put together, we'd love to come back and share what we're thinking and share what we think the future looks and see what it looks like to you guys.
Thanks, Pete. Jeff, I had another question on your handout here, corrective actions program page. The last bullet says submitted 40 FY14 consent order deliverables on time. Should that be FY13?
I think it's 14. It's what we've done in the first quarter in 14 so far.
So
yeah, so it's the
40 deliverables in 4 months.
Yeah. Well, correct. I think it's through December, so it's 3 months.
Bunny? Question? Dan?
Gentlemen, thank you for the presentation, but I just have to ask a question. As we're looking at the budget cycle and appropriation and projecting out years and years and years, so whoever is successful, and I know it's a contributing factors for a lot of involvement for many, many people, but let's say we were able to secure $1 billion in environmental management. I mean, are there enough people, are there enough hours in a day to utilize that money? Where would, I just need to ask that because, well, I got to put on my hat right now as a cab member, but if we're able to pull off $1 billion for EM dollars, could we put that to practical use today?
I think if you had the planning in place before that happened, it would be difficult at best. If it came as a surprise or something like that, certainly not. We look at we look at working off the highest priority and always giving the necessary money to the highest priority. So as we've worked 3706, it gets the first bite at money, and whether that's 120 million or 140 million, there's things work that will sacrifice down below that. Getting the right people, the right hydrologists, geologists, the right well drillers. Certainly, there's a limit on those commodities that are available to come up here and do work. So I'll tell you, Danny, I just think it'd be tough at that level of money to get everything to happen. You look at things like WTP up in Richland, the $1 billion, $2 billion pieces of work. It's thousands and thousands of workers that are up doing the construction and all the work to do that. You'd need, maybe something similar here with only their engineers and scientists that are doing a lot of that work, and then drillers and everything else. It'd be an interesting problem to take a look at,
I'd love
though.
to have
I'm
that
not.
problem, I really
Yeah,
would.
it'd be an interesting thing to take a look at.
And Jeff, on that, I appreciate that. So if and I appreciate the presentation on today, but I have one other follow-up question on today's presentation. But if we looked at a risk-based campaign analysis, wouldn't we want to have that data if we were fortunate enough to secure this type of funding? Isn't that already out there, looking at the whole composite of laboratory?
So what we're doing, the labs EM's had what's called a life cycle baseline in place. So it's from, any point in time that it was prepared all the way through the end of cleanup, what the overall schedule and campaigns. We usually write that out. So we are redoing that right now at the direction of DOE. They want an up-to-date life cycle baseline of the work from today all the way out to the end. And so I've got a program manager right in the middle of putting that together. That's where we look at this campaign-based approach. And then what I use is a denominator of the work. So I've got all this work, and I could do it by the end of the year if I. So then you look at, well, realistically, what's that budget going to be? Because that's going to sequence the schedule to the end of completion. So I tag in something like 170 or 200, and then I lay out the work based upon the priority of the campaigns that I want to execute. If I get more money, what I'm looked at, and I've talked to Pete about, is first of all, it's not to $1 billion, but I always want several tens of millions of dollars of work ready if we get more money that we can go do. So I've got that. If somebody came up and said, 2 years from now, we think we might be able to get you $1 billion, I'd go right back to that life cycle baseline, and I'd see what things I could pull forward that I could do within that expedited time frame.
Thank you, Jeff. And then on the presentation for Area 54, but we were looking at, Area TA 54, Area G specifically, but on this MDA 11, we didn't really touch base about MDA 11. I know that wasn't the topic of discussion today. Maybe it's been in past, but are there...
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
I'm just looking on this little map that I'm looking at.
H, maybe it's H. Is it H?
Okay, it might be H. And, okay, looks like 11 to me.
Yeah, so G, H, and L are all in.
L.
Yeah, G, H, and L are all in TA 54, so they're all kind of right in that area. Dave, do you have an update on L? Or Danny, where we are on, or Katie? One of you step forward.
Somebody help me out here.
So the quick update is actually, it's a very similar situation to MDAG. The CME report is currently sitting with NMED for review, so we are waiting for them to issue the statement of basis for the CME, for L. And H. Thank you, Danny. So they were all submitted at the same time, so.
But right now, though, your presentation talked about arguably a proposal or a plan, very many scenarios just for, let me go back to my map really quick. For Area G, it did encompass these other areas, right?
Right, so we've got, if you look at kind of what we did today up there with the alternatives and what we recommended, we've got separate things on H and on L. So our recommended alternative on Area L, so L's a lot, I'm just looking at the stuff here, is a lot smaller area, but we've also got an evapotranspiration cover over 2 areas in L. And if the cab wanted, we'd be happy to come down and do a brief of where we are on those. We don't have active work going on in either of those areas today, unlike Area G, but we do have the documents in with the state.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your time.
Any more questions for Jeff or Pete? All righty. Mr. Bishop?
Sure. So we'll figure out something to do with the chicken and egg kind of situation. Okay. All right, so in general, this is a rundown of how you can leave the lights on, we're okay. This is a quick rundown of where we are on the recommendations. Right now, all the recommendations have been responded to that have been submitted. Of course, there are a couple up here that weren't approved. The only one that we have not responded to was the one that Carlos took to the National Chairs meeting, talking about funding being held harmless. And so that went to Kate's shop. As we know, Miss Alexander is retiring in the next week or so. We haven't had a replacement announced at headquarters. So I did go ahead and work with Chris, and we're responding back from the field office, and the response back can be considered an administrative response from the field office pending a headquarters response, because we want something back to you, Mr. Chair. You know, it's been long enough, and we're at the mercy of headquarters, as you know. And generally that response is going to say, we don't necessarily disagree with you, but it's not the field office's place to tell Congress how much money to give us, but certainly we appreciate your position that the funding should be held harmless, and that we'll wait for the headquarters response from that point. And I'll have that over to Pete hopefully next week, so at the next meeting I'll be able to provide you guys that. At least you'll have an interim response from the field office while we wait from headquarters to respond. Any questions about other open recommendations at this point? Because I think we've closed them all, and we did respond to the 33 shafts, perhaps Mr. Viriel's or Dr. Viriel's complete satisfaction, but we responded the best we could, and that was that we will do complete alternatives analysis on that. Okay. As far as other matters from the DDFO, I'm going to put my boss on the spot again and ask you to maybe discuss our recent personnel changes or your new supervisor at the lab.
Absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for reminding me. Effective this past Monday, we have a new permanent field office manager at the Los Alamos Field Office. Her name is Kim Davis-Laback. She comes to us as the immediate past manager for Lawrence, DOE manager for Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. Some may recall that she was actually the deputy manager down at Sandia when Patty Wagner was there. Much to my delight, and I think Jeff's delight as well, Kim comes to us with a master's degree in environmental engineering. The first thing she said was, "I love waste," and promptly asked Jeff and I to take her out to TA 54 to look at the 3706 campaign. So that was a very good introduction, I think, and I would be delighted to invite her to appear before the CAB and introduce herself personally and share with you her management philosophy and anything else that she might have on her mind.
That'd be nice.
Okay.
Okay, continuing on. A few other things we mentioned earlier. We do have some folks packing their bags, getting ready to go. We've got the Waste Management 14 in Phoenix. We've got a couple members going to that. Beginning of March, we've got Angel and Irene headed to Washington, D.C. to go to the Environmental Justice Conference here, and I think, Chris, you're headed that way too, towards the end of March. And then in April, very quickly coming up, we have the chairs meeting in Hanford. I'll remind the members that if there's the way the process works, if there's a conference or a meeting you feel is of benefit to the CAB to have our representation there, you can submit your request to the chair and vice chair, and they'll discuss it and vote on it at executive committee and either approve you to go or not. And if you do go, you are obligated to come back and give a brief presentation discussion to the CAB of what you learned, what the conference was about, what opportunities we might be able to take advantage of. So we don't have a huge travel budget, but to the extent it's value added to the CAB, we'll certainly entertain those requests. Coming up, kind of a side note, I was wondering if anybody noticed we started a new advertising approach. We went back to the New Mexican. We think it has a little bit better circulation than maybe the LA Monitor does for these meetings. So I've got a lot more people in the meeting this time, so maybe that's working. And we also started using the Pasatiempo as well. And you guys can correct me after the meeting if I said that incorrectly. But we're using that as well on kind of switching back and forth, trying to get a little bit more interest in membership, a little bit more in the media. If you have other suggestions, get with me after the meeting. We'll talk about other ways to maybe get the word out for the CAB meetings, but I like the turnout today. I did hear in today's meeting that probably need to have a request in for additional discussion on how the cost estimates were developed for Area G. Is that... What are all the alternatives? How did we come up with the cost? Was that a... Okay. Also had a request for additional detail and probably replay on our PACA presentation we did in the past. And do we want to explore areas H and L at all? Do you want to know what the CME is for that and what's being proposed? Yes. Okay. So with that said, we're kind of setting a schedule for this early spring, filling up the spring with our meetings. We'll work on these. I'll work with Patty and Manise to get these prepared for you. Next meeting, we have a guest speaker, the famous or infamous Mr. Kovac, and it will be at Cities of Gold. Don't go to the Pewaukee offices. We'll be at Cities of Gold, and hopefully we'll have just as big, if not a bigger turnout for that one as well. We look forward to that. And those are items from the DDFO, Mr. Chair.
And Jeff and Pete, you'll be at that one, at that meeting?
What date is that?
February 12th?
February 12th, yes.
Okay.
Either on, either on.
Okay. And Lee,
Chairman, what time does that meeting start at? 2 o'clock, thank you.
have you, in terms of travel, maybe what we can talk about next time at the executive is, if budget allows, the possibility of looking at other cabs around the country and maybe sending a representative from the board to attend a cab meeting on one of their sites?
We've spoken about that in the past, and we would certainly entertain it. I think the folks at headquarters have some model cabs, and there are some that are, I think, close to a barroom fight, so they'd probably point us in the right direction. But and in comparison, we are highly regarded within the EMSSAB program as probably the outstanding. Our work with different governments, we have a lot of opportunities with the Pueblos and small townships and counties and cities to do a lot of intergovernmental work. The diversity on the cab for this one is well regarded. We meet well within the demographics of this area, via the census, and our proposals, and the fact that we do come to consensus on almost all of our recommendations, 100%, that we can find a common ground, is highly respected at headquarters. We're kind of the A-team when it comes to cabs, but we should go out and look at other cabs and look for opportunities to continue to improve.
Yeah, having attended several national chairs meetings and knowing the participants from the other site-specific advisory boards, we really are the standard setter, and it's thanks to all of you guys here. Anything else?
And our staff.
And our staff.
Yeah, Manise got us in here, right?
Any questions for Lee? Okay. We promised Scott that we would go ahead and open up another public comment period. And so, not just Scott, but if there's anybody else in the audience that wants to step up and address the board, please identify yourself for the record.
I'm Jay Coughlin. I'm with Nuclear Watch New Mexico as well, so I work with Scott. In responding to a couple of things, of course I'm going to remind the CAB that its job essentially is to, maintain a healthy sense of skepticism, and that to be highly regarded by the DOE may not be the criteria that you actually want. I know folks quite well that, for example, sit on the long-standing Hanford Site Advisory Board, and they are not currently well regarded by DOE. But I would say I regard that as actually a badge of honor. So take that for what it's worth. Now, sticking with the theme of a healthy dose of skepticism, The 3706 campaign, I want to congratulate Jeff Ayal as well, and that's all to the well and good. But my comments go above Jeff's pay grade. That campaign was supposed to be done 10 years ago. So the laboratory is really only catching up to what should have already been done. And the campaign is essentially, in my view, being used as a red herring, whereby the laboratory does not have to meet all of the other requirements under the consent order. Now, I'm not blaming the laboratory just on that. That has a lot to do with the Martinez gubernatorial administration as well. I don't think that would have occurred under the previous administration. Again, on skepticism, Chairman, you rightfully noted or stated, implied that you were impressed with the fact that in the first quarter, Los Alamos met 40 deliverables under the consent order. It should be asked, I believe a significant number of them were actually requests for extensions in time, essentially asking for permission to not deliver. So that's a question I posed to Jeff and Pete. Now, with respect to the costs that Pete brought up, the $29 billion costs, I'd like to assist him some and provide some of the background details to that. And out of that, I call it alleged $29 billion, which is clearly a showstopper. But out of that, just under $1 billion was in design. And why does it take nearly $1 billion to design taking something out? I don't get that. Another $7 billion was for management. Another $9 billion, now Pete noted the necessity for a substantial contingency. Well, in this case, it was a $9 billion contingency, almost 33%. And Pete observed that there's folks that cry loudly about when the laboratory doesn't want to do something, it highballs it. You're probably referring to me, or I'm certainly amongst those. But I do believe that the price is highly inflated. I'm not going to ascribe motives to it, but it's obvious with the already picked remedy that the laboratory does not want to do a full excavation. I also note, and Jeff has pointed this out, I would agree that off-site disposal is going to entail increased costs. That will certainly be the case. But Jeff himself has pointed out in the 3706 campaign that off-site disposal at Waste Consolidated Specialists is a relative bargain to what it used to be. Now, I'm not saying it's cheap, but it's cheaper than EnviroCare used to be in Utah, for example. And then just to close with a question to Jeff, I'd like to hit both members, the dynamic duo here, but it was stated repeatedly that no groundwater contamination has been found under Area G, and I believe that's true. Pete also had a great slide that stated how DOE wants to be transparent, open, and honest in all of its communications, and I commend that. However, here comes the however, I recall as late as 1996 when the head of Los Alamos's groundwater protection program was saying that groundwater contamination was impossible because the volcanic tuff overlying the aquifer was, quote, impermeable. And this went so far, I'm about to give Pete high praise. This went so far, the laboratory took it so far that it requested from the Environment Department a permanent waiver from ever having to monitor for groundwater contamination. And Pete, to his everlasting credit, when he was Secretary of NMED, rejected that variance. But anyway, I close with this question. Since it's stated that there is no groundwater contamination under Area G, which I believe is true, But as the further step, that obviously the laboratory does not want to remove all of the contaminants. I note that VOCs have migrated to 250 feet below the surface. However, I concede that that could be treated with soil vapor extraction. But then you also have small amounts of plutonium being found at 200 feet below the surface of Area G. So to close on a dramatic flourish or whatever, given that the laboratory does not want to remove all those wastes, is Los Alamos and is Los Alamos National Security prepared to state in writing that groundwater contamination will never occur from Area G?
I appreciate that comment, and Jeff, Jay, and I appreciate the acknowledgement that you made about the decision I made in a former position. What Jay's referring to is a groundwater monitoring variance that was requested by the laboratory pursuant to RCRA, and I granted one of those by way of background while I was Environment Secretary in 4 years. And Jay's correct; it wasn't at the laboratory because I felt that there wasn't sufficient technical information available, and so I'm not going to go on the record as saying anything right now. Jay, I think it's inappropriate to try and get me to make a statement that way. I think the record of how Jeff and I are proceeding with the cleanup stands for itself, and I would urge the CAB to look at that record and continue to have the dialogue. Jay and I meet quarterly, and we have a very candid, I would say productive discussions over a wide range of topics, some which I have authority over and some that I do not. And where I do not have authority over it, I do my best to get the information out. So I stick to my comments about being transparent and being open in these practices, and there's going to be ample opportunity for the public to comment through the CMEs and through the federal process, and encourage everybody who's interested to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete.
Anybody else?
Ask where the perception that the 3706 campaign was supposed to be done 10 years ago? Is that what you said? What's that based on?
Can you step back up to the mic, please?
Hi, I'm Scott Kovac with Nuclear Watch New Mexico, Mr. Chairman and members of the CAB. It's based on the original consent order dates, back in 2005 that said that, Area G was supposed to be cleaned up by the end of 2015. And so part of that was, that was a later version, but a part of that was removing all the above ground stored true. Had to be done first before any remediation clearly is done at Area G. And so that was the latest version of it was, in 2005 for the consent order. And I guess it was done before that. I don't have any particular instances.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I think, Jay, if you walk back from, okay, if we were closed, if we were able to meet the consent order and submit the remedy completion report by December of 2015, if you pin it at that and you walk backwards, one might logically conclude that the true waste had to be removed pretty early on. Whether it's 10 years or not, I don't know. I won't dispute that. But that's, I think, the logic. And given that the Environment Department doesn't have direct regulatory authority over true waste removal, but how do you close G if you don't get the true waste out? So I think that's, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but that's the logic that I understood and don't dispute it.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead,
Can I
Jeff.
just add one thing to
Sure.
what Pete talked about? And we have promised that we'll come back and give the details of the cost estimate for the excavation and treatment. But Jay brought up WCS and talked about that a little bit. With the campaign that we've got going today, with WCS bringing on their new federal cell and things like that. We pay between $5,000 and $10,000 a cubic meter for the treatment and the disposal cost alone. So if you look at the volume of waste in G, I mean, of one thing, that's mind-boggling to me. It's an awful lot of stuff over a lot of time, but if you simply do the math on that, you're at probably a couple $2 billion. Another kind of factoid I looked at, if you were going to do this work, how much does a dump truck haul? 10 yards? Somewhere between 5 and 15, depending on what you're doing. So if you look at that, you're at somewhere around 29,000. At 10, you're around 29,000. If you cut that in half, you're at 15,000 shipments. If you compare that to the number of shipments that we've done in the last 15 years to WIP, which is, that's about, if you're at 29,000 shipments, it's about double that. I mean, it's a huge magnitude of work to be able to do that. And I think those things are, as you go back and you look at the estimate of the work that has to be done for that quantity of waste, it'll become a little more clear. I don't know if 29 is exactly the right number. I haven't looked at all the details behind that, but we'll present that out. But it is a huge volume of work. It's a more complex waste than the waste that was worked at TA21 at MDAB, and so we'll see.
Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the CAB. I would also, in response to that, all the waste and all the materials were hauled up to the lab one truck at a time. So, it's doable. It's a lot, but it's doable. I'd also like to thank the efforts of the waste removal, the True Waste Stream, and the guys out here in the audience. Having said that, I don't, by being for cleanup does not mean that I'm for production of any more nuclear waste, and we need to stop producing the nuclear waste now, except for what we get from cleaning up stuff. One of my concerns is the groundwater monitoring well network at the laboratory, and it's the difference between an unlined trench, you have an unlined trench and you have a well away from here with some screen down here, and you're trying to catch these molecules of waste in these monitoring wells far away, not there. Most modern landfills have the leachate collection system underneath the landfill where it's immediate. They catch it right away. So that's the difference of leaving the waste in place, trying to catch it with a monitoring well. The path forward didn't really mention the impacts on the consent order. So at some point on that chart, we need to figure out what is there going to be a new end date of the consent order? What's going to happen to that? And then just one last thing is that I believe that DOE Order 435.1 is going to be up for public comment this spring or something, I think. So it might be interesting. The CAB may want to look at that. It's an opportunity for some public comments also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Lee, do you know anything about the 435.1 public comment?
It's been in revision for a couple of years. They haven't announced a specific review cycle on that at this point.
There may be somebody, George?
I think that they plan on getting it out this year. It's going through some additional reviews and paperwork right now. So it's a lot closer than it was a year ago or 2 years ago. But it's basically a complete revision of how the order is written. So the content will be approximately the same, but there's some changes in there.
So it's closer than it's ever been, but no specific schedule at this point.
Anybody else in the public want to address the board? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment. Well, folks, it looks like we made it through another grilling meeting. really intense information today. I really appreciate all the presentations and the people that came out today and spent time with us and helped us figure out a little bit more about what's going on with Area G. Just another reminder, on February 12th, at the Cities of Gold, Scott will be making another presentation on Area G. So I encourage and look forward to all board members that are here today attending that as well. Go ahead, Scott.
Do I have to bring the cookies?
Yes. Yes.
Chips.
Yeah, just make sure they're not from Colorado or the state of Washington. If we can go ahead and have some wrap-up comments from board members now. Bob, we'll go ahead and start with you and work our way around the table.
I thought the meeting was very productive, and I appreciate being able to voice what I feel, and I hope that Pete and Jeff recognize that we're their greatest fans, even though we do critique whatever's saying.
And I just appreciate the opportunity to continue to learn through sitting on the CAB.
I appreciate the information you guys brought forth today. I would like to make a comment about our previous recommendations. You have it down as realignment of the consent order. I think it would be better to call it alignment of the consent order with risk and environmental standards, because I think that's what we finally agreed upon, that the consent order should be reissued with an emphasis on both risk and any environmental standards that existed out there. And if I'm incorrect, yeah, I think a lot of the wording that was introduced had to do with that.
Funny, when I had the word risk in there, you were the one member that said take it out. And
I'm not saying take out risk. I'm saying that I think what we agreed upon was that the reissued consent order should be based on alignment with risk and other environmental standards.
So we'll take the action to go back to that original submission that the board had and look at that. And if it does need to be corrected in our tracking sheet, we will do that. If not, you're certainly open to resubmit that to the board for reissuing or revision. We'll see.
I don't think that the language is off base. I think the language does state in accordance with risk and environmental standards. Saying the way you present it there, it talks about a realignment, and I think what we called for was a renegotiation of the consent order in alignment with risk and environmental standards.
Right, and we'll make sure that what we have on our tracking sheet matches to what was submitted by the board. Okay.
Allison?
It was a lovely meeting. I appreciate the new timetable we're working with. It's an effective use of our time. And it was condensed, and there was a lot of good information presented. And I want to thank all the subject matter experts that came to drill down on any wild question we could come up with. And Manise and your team, this doesn't happen by accident, and it really facilitates the best use of all of our time. And I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I would like to thank the presenters as well. Jeff and Pete, thank you for all the information. I know I'm fairly new, a little bit less than a year on the board, but everything that you guys provide helps greatly, kind of bring things together from photos to arguments and all that stuff, and I just want to thank you guys very much. I also want to take time to thank the public for coming out and asking very direct questions. I, as a board member, would only, this is kind of a challenge, I guess. Whenever we speak to attest to something, just like these gentlemen do, they provide facts and documents. And if we're going to challenge somebody, I would respectfully request not only public, but ourselves to provide factual information rather than opinions at times. Thank you.
Again, all of you. I appreciate, the comments and things, and the public for participating. Certainly Jeff and Pete and the other staff members that are here from LAL and DOE. It's been certainly productive and informative, and we appreciate that. Thank you very much. And staff, appreciate the facilities and what's gone on. And I look forward to further information and productive meetings about what's going on here. And we need to be informed, and then we can make better recommendations and decisions. That's very helpful. Thank you. Staff.
Mr. Chairman and the members of the board, thank you for your time. Thank you to all people who took the time to come out today. Thank you to my staff, William and Bridget. Thank you very much, Dave. Thanks to Lee for all of his support, and the DOE, and of course to Carlos. Good meeting. I would like to ask the members, if you're interested or you're thinking of staying in Albuquerque on March 26th, please send me an email so I can get those reservations made. Thank you.
It was a great meeting, as always. Good information about Area G, so thank you. And I'm really looking forward to the next meeting, to hearing Scott's presentation.
Another good, productive meeting. It was good to see a lot of members from the public, and it was one of those rare meetings because there's quite a bit of folks out there from DOE, so that's always good to see. But I'm going to piggyback here on Adrian's comments. It's always good. The gentleman there, I believe his name was Jay, mentioned that, it's not always good, to be on so-and-so's good side, and that's true, but, I think as a board, we've always had really good, productive meetings with the folks from DOE.
I want to thank the staff. They're always put on a good meeting. Thanks, Jeff and Pete, for the information that you've given us, and Lee. I also want to make a comment to, I can't remember his name, with the public comment, that the way you present your comments, you got to remember that we are citizens also, and that you also got to remember that the way you present them, we're going to either agree with you or go completely against you because of the way you present them. And I appreciate the way Scott presents because of his manner. If you become too aggressive and just too aggressive, you're going to turn me off and want me to go against what you're saying, if you understand that point. I have found that, or I see in my view, that the costs of what we're having to pay to do all this is because of groups such as yours. So that's my view of why it's so expensive. So thanks very much.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming also, and I thought it was very informative.
I would like to thank both Jeff and Pete. Those were very interesting presentations. I've looked at the CME Revision 3. I haven't read every word. It's 700 and some pages long. But I would say I'm not sure that it makes a convincing case for the selected remedy as being protective for the long term, hundreds of years. At the same time, it's hard to justify, I think, spending $29 billion, or even if it's only $10 billion, it's still 30 or 100 times more than the other remedy. And so there's such a vast gulf between the cost of it two. It's almost hard to compare them on a one-on-one basis. And then I have a request that at one of our later meetings, maybe in the summer, we have a presentation on the chromium plume and what's happened with it and what their plans are for the future, because that's another significant environmental issue.
Also, I'd like to thank you for informative presentations and a good question and answer session early in the meeting. I think we got a lot of good information there. And I'd like to thank the members of the public who did comment, and it's, I think it's good to have more comments like we did at this meeting, so whatever we can do to facilitate the interested public coming in and commenting, both before, in case you have, previously prepared comments based on what's gone on before, and towards the end of the meeting, so that members of the public also have a chance to comment on what's been said and discussed during the meeting.
I want to thank the staff, and Mr. Chair, I want to thank you for accommodating the chance for the public to comment, not just one time. Let's keep it open. Thank you for coming out. I welcome all comments, opinions, in whatever form we can get them, as long as we're respectful. I'm fine with that, and I want to invite more. This is a great turnout from the public thus far. It's a relative thing. I'd like to see more. And also, please remember, if we're community advisory board members, we're here to represent as well. And if at any time anybody from the public cannot attend, please comment, contact Manise if you can't find our contact information, and let us help represent anything anybody out there that needs help with the representation and the comments. And we try very hard to get down to the answers, whether they're within our mission, whether someone like me wants to see more boom and burn, and we do push, respectfully with the DOE and the Lano folks. And I do appreciate you here, and I'm okay with a little bit more if some consider controversial questions or anything else. That's what we're here for. And I do appreciate our role, and I do think that that's what makes us more of a model. Maybe we're not as, our meetings aren't as fiery. Maybe they're a lot more respectful than other places, and maybe our communication channels are a little bit more open. I just look around the table and I see great representation. I know we're working on better diversity, although I think it's still not too bad for now. I do appreciate people like Bob and others, and Alex and the rest of you, and Daniel, I should name everybody, for, what we bring to the table. And again, if any part of that's lacking, we need to hear from you all, and keep us in check too, and let us help you represent our communities at large and go on charging with the mission. And again, thank you everybody for being here.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I want to also echo what was said. Probably 99.9% of everything that's been said, but everybody has their own opinion, and I respect that, and I respect everybody's opinion. But I do want to thank you, Chairman. I learned a lot with you, how you facilitate a meeting and how you run a meeting, so I want to thank you. But I want to thank our presenters. You all bring information to us anytime we ask for it, and I learn every time from any presentation. It always makes my mind think more and more and say, when can I stop asking for more information, because there's always so much. I think we're all after one. My point of view is everybody's after the same goal. We want to mitigate any risk potentially that's up there. It's just how we achieve it. Can we achieve it in the short term, or is it going to be a long-term fix? But it's just how we achieve it today. And fortunately or unfortunately, I think it comes around with dollars. And what I know or what I don't know, we have to go to other funding sources in a different state to achieve those dollars to come back home. That's just what I see. But I want to thank my CAB members. That I know a lot of you, I don't know a lot of you, but you all putting your own personal time into this also. And I know what it is to put personal time and commitment into things that you believe in, and fighting for your communities, fighting for your families, fighting for your beliefs. And I just value you, and I value the public who's here. And if you're here because you're paid to be here, if you're here because you just want to be here, it's all relative. I really believe it is. We all have a common interest to be here. If it's to clean up New Mexico, if it's to clean up our nation, if it's to promote economic development, whatever our reasons here, we're here for a reason. And I also want to compliment this CAB, and because what I see in this agenda and what I see as far as openness and transparency,
I don't even know every single thing. There's Facebook, there's Twitter. You guys are putting everything out there from staff. Every public access channel that you guys have this on. So it's not like this information isn't out there if somebody wants to look at this information. And I won't go on anymore, but thank you all for all you do.
Of course, I would echo everything that Gerard and Daniel said and everybody else here pretty much. I'm very grateful for the comments from the public, and I'm very grateful for the comments from Pete and John and, Lee. But I just to emphasize that it's easy to get defensive when you guys might come off like you're attacking these guys, or we may come off like we're attacking you. But, like you just said, like Danny just said, it's really we're all in the same boat, and I don't think any of us really want to be burned up by nuclear energy or whatever it is. And I think if we can all try not to be defensive and just move forward, and maybe that is why the CAB does well with the Department of Energy, because you can get more with honey than with something else. And I think we have accomplished some things. And I hope you guys will tell everybody to come back, because the more information we have on both ends, the better. And thank you so much for coming, and thank you guys.
If I just might, I want to assure the CAB members, I in no way felt attacked, and let me just tell you why in a little story. Jay, you've probably heard me tell this 100 times. Back when I was with the Environment Department, one of the biggest concerns I had was helping to kickstart the cleanup up at Los Alamos. So I just felt it wasn't going in the direction, in the velocity that it needed to be, and many of you know that I actually issued the first draft consent order back in 2002. But every year when the budget process came through, I would ask the Department of Energy what their budget was going to be for the cleanup. And if it wasn't for Scott and Jay, I'd probably still be looking for that information. They would always take the time to pick up the phone, let me know what they knew, tell me what they thought. And I always said if I ever get in a position where I had that information and there was public and folks that needed that information, I would try and do a better job, which is why I came here today and talked about the budget. So I didn't feel attacked. I think it's great that you guys are here. You always make me think, maybe make me think in different directions, maybe think in ways that it's hard that I didn't want to think, but I wanted to reassure both of you and the CAB that I wasn't offended. I think it's great. And if I scrunch my face a little bit or something like that, it's just because I'm being asked to think in a way that I hadn't done before. That's a good thing.
Very good. Wonderful. Members, one last question. You have now experienced a 12 to 5 meeting as opposed to a 1 to 7, with lunch coming ahead of the meeting instead of at the end of the meeting. So just with a show of hands, how many prefer this time frame?
I'm voting for whoever isn't here.
Very well, very well. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, if I could, in light of what Commissioner Mayfield talked about, the knowledge we gain here, I'm still wanting to know, we can work it through Santa Fe Community College to get some sort of certificate or something. Educational benefit, it's amazing.
Some sort of credit, educational credit.
Educational credit.
So, Mr.
Bob
Chair,
is a professor, I don't know.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'd like to thank everybody, and as DDFO, I'd like to remind everybody I consider you a subject matter expert, the board members, on being a citizen of New Mexico. We appreciate your input, we appreciate your time, and it's my pleasure to adjourn this meeting. Thank you.